Good evening, race fans, and welcome back to TRTM for tonight's coverage of Season 3, Round 4 of the HCCL Multiclass Championship. We return after a short break then in the first half of Season 3, right back into action right here in France. As always, I'm Ricard. You join us here at the home of the former French Grand Prix here at the circuit Paul Ricard. Founded in 1970 with this particular layout having cropped up in 2005, then later again in 2019. It's comprised of 13 turns and 3.5 miles, I should say, of FIA Grade 1. As mentioned, former home of the French Grand Prix up until 2022, but in the modern day, host to the European Le Mans Series is 4 hours of Castellet. The GT World Challenge Europe Series is 3 hours of Paul Ricard, that which uses this current layout we see today. The FIM Endurance World Championships Bol d'Or, which is effectively a 24-hour endurance race for motorcycles. Some potentially could regard that as the Le Mans on two wheels. That's ran at this circuit from 1978 to 1999, and then from 2015 onwards in its return. TCR World Tour is set to return here in 2026, and so too is TCR Europe and Ferrari Challenge Europe Series respectively, all marking their calendars for 2026 as a return here to Circuit Paul Ricard. The FFSA GT Series has ran here intermittently since 1997. It's a bit of a divisive track. It has already drawn some criticism from drivers on the field today, owing to its very peculiar design and nature. In this current day, we find one of 4 major configurations being used on this highly modular circuit. Just to give some synopsis as to how modular, taking a look down that long straight section on the minimap, you'll find in the middle of it the Mistral chicane. That in itself has 8 configurations alone. In terms of overall track configurations, there are 4 that are widely adopted and have been in use for the last 26 years. That being the 1D circuit, which came about in 2002, the 3D, which is a short version of the 1D that came about in 2002 as well, and then in the modern day, the 1CV2, which was the one used for the French Grand Prix in most recent years, and the 1AV2, which is the one we're on today. Those two, their variations exist purely within the presence or lack thereof of what would be turns 8 and 9 at the Mistral chicane. Without it, we find ourselves with one of the longest back straights in the calendar. Taking a look into what we've got coming up today then, we're at round 4 of the championship, the first 90-minute race of the season. The second one will be at the penultimate round at round 7 at the Nürburgring 24-hour layout. That'll be the Nordschleife and GT circuit combined. And taking a look at the session itinerary for today, we do find ourselves with much of the same regulations, albeit with the major caveat being that 90-minute race and an additional mandatory pit stop to follow for both fuel and tyres. Qualifying remains unchanged then, with 10 minutes going to GT3 qualifying, 10 minutes to GT4, and they'll run back to back for 20 minutes. At the moment, we're in the midst of free practice. So before we get on to the main show then, in towards qualifying and the race to follow, let's give ourselves a quick recap of how the last 3 rounds have fared, with 15 minutes of free practice left to go. Taking a look through it then, it's been a story of majoritively 2 drivers apiece on either side of the championship. In GT3, Dion Helgelien started the season off in Barcelona with a bang, winning the opening round with Ford. And then for the 2 races to follow thereafter, it was Mr. Scallops back-to-back in Watkins Glen and Indianapolis at rounds 2 and 3 for Nissan. Vladislav Mizin started the season off on a high back-to-back victories in Barcelona and Watkins Glen, but in Indianapolis, it was Matthias de Munster to take up the helm. Nonetheless, GT4 remains solely dominated till this day by Mercedes here in Season 3, whereas Ford and Nissan have exchanged blows for dominance in GT3. Looking into the championship standings then, as we stay on board at the moment with Stephen Sutton, we find Mr. Scallops firmly in the lead of the championship, leading by 5 points over Helgelien in 2nd place, Giacomo Marianelli for Ferrari in 3rd place. Stephen Sutton on your screens at the moment, 4th place with 40 points to play with. He's up the road from Pascal Stoltz in 5th. Alexander Hivrich in 6th place, ahead of Anthony Valorio in 7th. Looking towards the back of the field in a joint 8th position, we find Corey Aiken with 28 points, and sharing that stead with him at this time, Luca Tamburini, both of whom hold 28 points in the championship. Isai Palacios, 10th place after Indianapolis with 14 points in the GT3 championship. In GT4s, it's much the same story up front, 5-point gap between Mizin and de Munster. The 2 Mercedes cars leading ahead of Przemak Zulem in 3rd place with Aston Martin. Tom Wells with Ginetta in 4th place, 43 points and only 7 points away from the podium. Sahiota not far off his trails in 5th place. Marco Gaioliolo for Alpine in 6th place with 34 points to his name at this time, ahead of Matthew Copsey in 7th place. Andrew Canoro in 8th, and he's He's up the road ahead of Odaris Castillo in 9th in the championship. Rounding out the top 10 for GT4s then heading into today, Roman Zdanov with 14 points. So things are going to liven up over the course of this round. Of course, wet and wild conditions, the elephant in the room here, on top of being back at the circuit Paul Ricard for the first time here on TRTN since the trailing end of Season 8 of VSR Phoenix. That was in the controversial title fight bout between Just Boris, the then defending Season 7 champion, and the championship challenger, then to champion to be of Season 8, being White Doctor. But of course, that's a different series for a different conversation. We find ourselves here with the folks at the High Caliber Community League, trailing off of what was a fantastic running of the 2.4 hours of Kyle Army just a few days ago. Back into the swing of things then in this mighty championship indeed. We see with Sutton was briefly fastest in the session so far, as we now see it fall into second fastest behind Mr. Scallops, who's looking for 3 in a row. Things relatively sparse on the grid today, with drivers still hesitant to get out of the pit lane. We see here last round's GT4 race winner, that being Matthias de Munster on his way down the Mistral Straight. Currently trailing off the back of the round 1 GT3 winner, Dion Helgelien, as they make their way down towards the Curb de Sang. Now, things are going to be quite intense in that opening and final sector. The middle sector is almost entirely a straightaway from the run out through the looking at the map here, that would have been the run out through the Virage de la Saint-Baume, down the Mistral Straight, and then to the Curb de Sang. That's effectively the entirety of Sector 2. Actually, it stops just before the Curb de Sang, so that does make all the more better, really. This third sector, super intense, of course, with the wet weather pounding down and drivers aiming for a lower drag setup. That is going to leave them in a bit of an awkward spot, very similar to what we see when wet weather beats down on the track in Monza. We had that back in season 1 of the GT4 Challenge here on HCCL in the opening round. That was wet and wild conditions that gave rise to a fight between Christian Lebay and Asahi Ota, between Chevrolet and Aston Martin in the opening round of that season. We saw just how bizarre that turned out. We see Helgelien across the line in third place. Now, to pick up on why Ford may be struggling in today's session, let's get into the conversation just before the end of free practice onto balance of performance. Starting things off then as we stay on board with Helgelien on the topic right now as it stands for BOP. And for Ford, it's 10 kilos alongside Aston Martin, with Lamborghini and McLaren neutral in weight gain or loss. BMW losing a single kilo and Ferrari losing 5. Porsche losing 10, Lexus losing 34, and Ferrari with the 488 losing 36. Now, we'll try to gather some data as and when we can on the leading Nissan. That'll be really the elephant in the room to discuss, and taking a look just briefly into our notes whilst we bring up the selection here for the GT4 balance of performance. Just quickly taking a look, the Nissan GTR, that being specifically the 2018 model, will not be finding things much better, sharing its burden with Aston Martin and Ford with 10 kilos on the R35. So things are not exactly swimming here for Mr. Scallops, up and ahead of those Fords, though he does lead by just very nearly 3/4 of a second here in free practice. Looking into the GT4s, we get back on board here with Matthias de Munster. Looking into the conversation, Mercedes find themselves neutral with McLaren for weight gain and loss. Up ahead of them, gaining weight as the only manufacturer to do so in today's round by looks of it is Porsche, with the 718 Cayman gaining only 3 kilos. Chevrolet and Audi losing 5 kilos apiece, with Alpine losing 11. That'll be great news for Marco Gaioliolo and the number 30 losing double figures. And whilst we're on that subject, Aston Martin loses 25 kilos under balance of performance. That's fantastic news for Asahi Ota, who have 25 kilos over the Mercedes cars that normally find themselves at the forefront of action. So things may not be so easy this time around for De Munster and Mizin, up and ahead of their competition, mainly coming from the quarters of Aston Martin. The elephant in the room there, I suppose, whatever abbreviation best fits something that is light by comparison, is going to be the topic of Ginetta. Tom Wells, the sole user of the G55, will be beaming ear to ear today to know that he's losing 26 kilos of what is already one of the lightest cars in GT4 coming into today's round of the championship. Every ounce is going to count here as well. That's all going to play quite nicely into the longer standing conversation of fuel consumption. With 90 minutes of racing, these GT4s will have to pit on 2 occasions for fuel. That's the same current burden they share with the GT3s. But in their case, it may be very well a consideration that the lighter weight is going to contribute to slightly better fuel economy in the long run. That means they can min-max just that little bit harder and maybe run a few less litres of fuel. Of course, all very fine calculations we've seen carried out in a myriad of endurance races before, this but one of them of two available in Season 3's calendar before we're back onto the topic of the 60-minute races that have dominated the season thus far. Wells second fastest in GT4, 7th overall, as we see Mr. Scallops still leads the session, but most recently coming up to second place, Anthony Valorio on super beneficial balance of performance for the number 41 Ferrari 488. Now he's ahead of both Fords in this session so far, Sutton third and Helge in fourth. Sutton most recently having overtaken Helge for role of the fastest Ford of the GT3 grid. See Julian 9, new driver for this grid, the number 79 Ferrari, currently slots in to fifth fastest, but you can see a huge wad of time lost there between himself and Helge. That can easily be taken up by some of the other drivers on this field in GT3. We see Julian Hayes on his way round, by looks of it here, the run up through the Virage du Camp, just on the exit of Virage de l'Hotel. Now he's on his way out through the Virage de la Sainte-Baume onto the Mistral straight. You can see trailing on the back end there, the Aston Martin of Asahi Ota. On the run down towards the Mistral straight then. Bear in mind, we just saw another driver onto the timing charts there, and we saw it's Luca Tamburini. Big slide, though, there for the Argentinian talent. On his way currently in and around the Verrières at turns 1 and 2. Very, very big slide indeed before we get on to the main line of action in qualifying and the race therein to follow. An hour and a half of racing here in round 4 of the championship. It's going to be a curious one to see how this unfolds. Now, already criticism has come in about this track. We mentioned it just a little bit earlier on. It was Przemek Julim that was quoted as saying that this is almost like a concrete parking lot. And those were criticisms in line with the way that the track has been designed. Now, one of the most prominent visual aspects of the circuit Paul Ricard is its lack thereof of any gravel traps. You can see subsidizing the presence of gravel traps of these long winding ribbons of color on either side of the track. Now they play a practical aspect. They are much coarser lines of specially paved tarmac designed to slow the cars down when they make contact with it, and that's whether driving directly over them or more often than not sliding across them. It's designed to slow down the momentum of the car without dragging it into a gravel trap and causing considerable amounts of damage to the car. Even though it looks like a relatively soft exit for some, it is still quite a harsh impact for the suspension systems on the car. So that's what the idea around it was. The blue lines slow the car down moderately. The red lines, which we see on the very far ends of the track, is designed to slow the car down much, much quicker. You can see them there just cropping up in the foreground on the run out through the Curb de Garabin. So we stay here with Tamburini. Things have not been super swell at this time. That Porsche struggling in the wet. Now, that is a bizarre case. As we've come to see in the last couple of months, Porsche has actually become a very underrated pick for wet weather racing. In the hands of Tamburini at the moment, he does appear to be struggling with that number 813. We saw that case in point over the course of the start of the last lap, and he was sliding his way out through turns 1 and 2. We see there knocking all of the cones out of his way on this run, on his way round the Verrières. Turns 1, now turn 2. Now turn 2, very awkward section of the track indeed. It's actually off camber on the run round turn 2. So this could be an area of quite heavy contention across both fields of today's grid. Taking a look for the GT4s then, Tom Wells currently fastest in the session by a factor of getting in over half a second there. I mean, that is quite a surprising statistic when you consider the Ginetta, a car not exactly very well known for straight line speed, on a track with a monstrously large back straight, is currently leading ahead of Mercedes and Aston Martin. Now, we've still yet to see presence on the timing charts by Vladislav Mizin. Definitely do come to expect some heavy hitting times out of him today. I would also keep a very close eye here on another featherweight car of the grid, that being the number 30 Alpine of Marco Gaioliolo. Now, I'm not entirely sure if we actually saw him in the last round for Gaioliolo. We'll check in, though. Looking in the into the standings just very quickly to reaffirm any case here. I'm pretty sure, yeah, it was a DNF for Gaioliolo in the last race. So this is now going to be another opportunity for redemption. Still finds himself in the top 10 in the GT4 category. We could see he's up and alongside at this time Asahi Ota on their run down towards the line on the exit of turn 13. Across the line then, Gagliolo sadly doesn't put a time in, and Ota stays in Division 3rd. So struggling to find any more time here in free practice. Now, for a lot of these drivers, this is just going to be getting themselves acclimatized to the inclement weather at play here for this round. That's not going away anytime soon. We're going to be in for wet weather racing. 813 coming to the line. So Tamburini on his way back in, currently still 5th and ahead of Julian 9. We see a significant improvement there by Tamburini. Now puts himself within half a second of Stephen Sutton in 4th place. From behind them, Vladislav Mizin now takes the helm of the fastest time, but not by the margins normally cited here for the number 2, where he usually leads these sessions by upwards of nearly seconds. It is only about 3/10 that reside between himself and Tom Wells at the front running. The front row, I should say, of the GT4 field here in free practice. Now, of course, it is just free practice. We do have to take a lot of this data with a grain of salt, and considering that for the 4th round running, we still yet to have a full comprehensive breakdown of a top 10 prediction for either category, we are once again heading into qualifying blind. Now, I've been reflecting on this for some time as we now see going fastest in the session Matthias de Munster up and ahead of Mizin by about 2/10, a little under 2/10 of a second between the two Mercedes cars at the front of the GT4 field, relegating Wells to the back of the podium in the times so far. Now, that could still change over the course of qualifying. To pick back up on that, though, I think for the sake of qualifying, the fact that we've not had sufficient data to go off of all season long, I really don't see that to be much of an issue, because what it has created is a real air of suspense. We can't now ratify what the grid is going to look like based off of just raw data. We have to see it in the flesh. We have to see it live, and that's often created much more moment-to-moment action in the qualifying sessions. It does make things a lot more exciting for both us and I imagine as well for you, the viewers at home. And where we normally like to break down the data, of course, we loved siphoning through all of the raw figures and data and lap times and all the telemetry, so on and so forth. Something inherently pure about not having all of that and just being able to gun it by eye like they did in the old days of motorsports. Nonetheless, we see here with Tom Wells on his way down towards the Virage du Pont, turn 13 on his run down towards the line. That little Ginetta punching well above its weight. And this is on the precursor run in towards qualifying. We'll see where it does land him over the course of the coming qualifying session. Currently about a minute left to go, so on to his final flying laps here of free practice. The number 12 sharing the track at this time with the front-running pair here, the two Mercedes cars at the forefront of GT4's championship, Vladislav Mizin and Matthias de Munster. And that's the same gap held between these two as it is at this time between Helgulian and Mr. Scallops, both of whom in the pit lane at this time. Now, just before we get to the end of free practice, we catch on board here with Anthony Valorio. Let's just quickly remind ourselves, though, of the regulations for qualifying, as it's not changed on the run in towards round 4 with the introduction of the 90-minute races. It does nothing to affect the status quo of qualifying. Now, the first 10 minutes going over to GT3, and then the last 10 minutes going to GT4, as always. So we'll have that 20-minute timer at the top of our screens. It'll be the GT3s out first, and then when the timer strikes 10 minutes left, that's when the GT4s get to come out to play. Valorio fastest by nearly a whole second over that last lap just at the very end of free practice. 1 minute 59.227 for the number 41. Could this be the challenge run for Ferrari in this season? 4 races in, 3 races down, their 4th in this season. Still yet to have seen a win. So we see de Munster still faster than Mizin. We'll see if there is any rebuttal right at the very end here of free practice. Down towards the line comes the number 2. And at the end of the session there, by looks of it, sadly couldn't find anything of it. Or was it a case where he was just able to beat the clock there before the end of free practice? Coming to the line, Asahi Ota in the 55 Aston Martin. He peels back into the pit lanes. Could that be the proceedings in towards the look of qualifying, where we see the checkered flag did come out for Matthew Copps. He goes up and ahead of Asahi Ota for Division 4th, I should say, sorry, in towards the end of free practice. We've still yet to see the rest of the grid in, so I believe it may very well have been a case that Mizin had beaten the clocks here. We'll wait to see, though. Number 12 coming to the line, and it was a case that green light. Give it all you can. And maybe it was not. Julhay12 in chat saying can't see anything. You wouldn't happen to be tuning in on the mobile client, would you? we've had repeated issues over the course of the last couple of weeks in regards to the mobile client. Everything looks fine on our end. We'll actually go ahead and check out the live stream ourselves just to double check everything is going as it should. And yeah, that's all fine on our end. So if you're tuning in on the, whether or not it's the TV client or the mobile client, there is often quite a lot of rendering issues when it comes to actually seeing the live streams. So if that's the case, I'm not entirely sure what to suggest. It's just a little bit of a break in the script, as it were, before we get back onto the topic of qualifying. We see at the moment, first out into the fray is Scallops and Sutton. Browser is usually the best one for it. If you hop on a computer, laptop, what have you, and then go on to Twitch via Google, via, you know, what do they call it now for Microsoft? Edge? Bing? I don't remember. That. Samsung Internet? I don't know. Safari? Any browser will do. But yeah, there's been a lot of problems we've noticed for viewers, and we know a lot of you are tuning in at home trying to watch via Xbox, PlayStation, whether it's on your TVs as well, your smart TVs, whether it's been on your mobile devices. There have been a lot of issues in regards to Twitch. And it's weird as well, because when I try and check on my phone, I'm not signed in on the TRTN account on my phone, so I can watch from your point of view, and it's fine on my end, but I've noticed it's almost 9 times out of 10 one of those 3 distinct platforms: console client, TV client, mobile client. All 3 of them have had issues with us in the last couple of months. Still do not yet know the explanation behind it. Let's go and catch on board, though, after that miniature rant, on board with the leading car of GT3's qualifying here in the opening 10 minutes of the session. On board with Mr. Scallops. Now, bear in mind, back-to-back victories this season so far, hunting down a hat-trick, also returning champion of Season 2's GT3 wing. Things are looking very, very hopeful this season in his championship defence. On board then with the Nissan of Mr. Scallops, down through the Verrières. Following on through then in towards a very bizarre section of the track. Now, it's a very Marmite area. You either love it or you hate it. And this is on the run in towards turn 3 here. The Virage de l'Hôtel in towards the Virage du Camp and the Virage de la Saint-Baume. Loops back in on itself. Very difficult section to gauge mentally, as it does throw a lot of different corner types in your face, and it's not going to be much easier for Scallops, of course, on wet weather conditions. Out through the Virage de la Saint-Baume, down the Mistral straight. And without the Mistral chicane commonly found on the French Grand Prix layout, we will find this Nissan caning its way up towards nearly 170 miles an hour. Now, we'll not be seeing speeds in excess of 175 on most occasions like we do at the Autodromo Nazionale di Monza, but it's going to be a case that this is still one of the faster circuits in circulation, especially on the European roster. I think the fastest we'll often get anywhere else is going to be on the run down the 3/4 of a mile of back straight we'd find at the Circuit of the Americas. On our way now through Le Bousset. It's been a great start so far then by Mr. Scallops. Following on his trails then will be Stephen Sutton and Dion Helgelien, the first 3 times of today's qualifying session for the GT3. So far, so good for the Nissan, and setting that baseline time by all which other times will be compared to on reference. Now, major challenger for pole position today, just gauging off of their performance in free practice, is going to be that number 41 Ferrari of Anthony Valorio. Very, very likely signs that he and Mr. Scallops will go head-to-head for the run of GT3's pole position. Down towards the line then, after nearly halfway through the GT3 session, our first baseline time comes through, 2 minutes, 892 from Mr. Scallops. Stephen Sutton across the line sadly didn't set a time. Is that the case following therein for the fellow Ford there, number 45 of Helgelien across the line? No, as he puts 435 thousandths off of the fastest time. From behind him there, we see Luca Tamburini, provisionally 3rd fastest in the session. The number 310 coming to the line, not too far from now, just on the exit of, by looking at there, the Virage de Bandor, and now through the Curb du Garaban. On our way through to turn 12 and turn 13, Julian Hayes, the number 310. Then from behind them, just making their way out through the Curb de Sang down towards Le Bousset, is the number 41. And then right behind them looks to be the number 79, so that'll be Anthony Valorio and Julian 9. Down towards the line then, Julian Hayes. And as he crosses the line, sadly doesn't put a time in. Now he's got 5 minutes left to play with here. Lap times getting up in and around 2 minutes to the sort of high 159s as we saw to the end of free practice. They're not left with many options here. About 3 laps before the GT4s get to come out and play. we see here for Valorio. Has run around the Curb de Garlaban, down to Virage de la Tour, and the Virage du Pont. 2 Ferraris then for the price of 1 out through turn 13. Behind him there, Julian 9 in the 296. Valorio to the line then in the 488. Let's see what he can do then over his first flying lap. And he's only 3rd fastest after his first run of things. We see from behind him there, Julian 9, 5th fastest in the session so far. So as it stands after the first run of flying laps, it's Scallops, Helgalian, Valorio, Tamburini, and 9. Still yet to have put times in then, Sutton, Black, and Hayes. We see then coming up to the line next, what who started off this qualifying session, Mr. Scallops, the 394. Nissan looking at another strong performance today. Now major threat, as mentioned before, coming from Ferrari. We'll see whether or not that's going to come to fruition in the next 4 minutes across the line then. And by looks of it, an extension, yes, to a 2 minutes, 192. Now 1.1 seconds up over Helgalian. As you see here, Sutton across the line again, yet to have put a time in on the chart. So real struggle right off the bat here for Ford. Helgalian across the line sadly couldn't find any improvement. As you see here for Tamburini, across the line maintains 4th. Next checking in then with Hayes, and it already looks to have been invalidated for the McLaren. On his run round turn 13. Be catching next on board with the 707. That'll be Stephen Black with Ferrari. Across the line then Hayes, and he does put in a valid time, and it's 5th fastest up and ahead of new fellow driver Julian 9. So as we see here, crawling on to the last 3 minutes of the session, better late than never in the case of the 707, but where exactly can he put things in the next 2 minutes and 40 seconds of this? He'll have 1 more lap, perhaps even 2, if we are to consider the leftover time. But over the course of that last lap, just no time set in. It's big trouble coming up if he can't set one on the next lap. Coming to the line then, Valorio. From 3rd on the field, 2nd fastest now up and ahead of Helgalian. From behind him, Julian 9 from 6th on the field. Does make an improvement by about a second over his personal best, but maintains that 6th place position for the time being. Things getting closer between the leading pair, but question therein remains where we had 20 minutes of time to play with across the board for the GT3s with half the amount. Can the Ferrari hope to catch up to the Nissan of Mr. Scallops? Down through turn 13, then coming to the line once again. Can it be an extension into the 159s for Mr. Scallops? Across the line he goes, and by looks of it, no being the current answer. Number 7 coming to the line. Better late than never for Sutton. 4th fastest as he crosses the line. Helgalian up in front of him. Relegated to the back of the podium. Not too far off a chance of returning. And he does make an improvement, but now finds himself divided by only a minuscule 65 thousandths of a second away from the front row. He peels to the side there, and I believe that's the end of his run in the GT3 qualifying. We can see already queuing up at the end of the grid here. The end of the pit lane, I should say, Matthew Copsey in the 97 Porsche 718 Cayman. Number 310 and number 707 next up towards the line. We see behind them the number 41 just out through the Curb de Sang, down through Le Bousset. We've got word on the weather conditions here. This was just something brought to our attention, and as we check the weather radar, yes, the signs do show it. In the next 10 minutes, the weather is going to be picking up to get even worse. So for the GT4s, time is really of the essence. Those first flying laps, they have effectively found themselves, unless they can properly go full prime Ayrton Senna in the rain here, they are going to find themselves pressed up against very difficult circumstances, as those first flying laps will be effectively all they have. 30 seconds before the GT4s come out. We just see across the line there Stephen Black to 8th in the session, rounding out the last of the times to come through for GT3. So you see the 79 Julian 9 coming to the line here. Across the line, stays 7th in the session, so we catch on board now with the forefront of the GT4 field. We'll be taking a look on board as it looks to be somewhat of a drag race on the way out. This is going to be a curious one. You can see Marco Gaioliolo and Matthew Copsey, they're getting the jump, and also getting the jump over him was 2 of the Mercedes cars, as I believe the Alpine forgot to turn off its pit limiter. That was Dennis Gonzalez and Matthias de Munster. Meanwhile, the GT3s are still out on track onto their final flying laps. The number 7 having crossed the line a moment ago. That was Stephen Sutton. We'll see where their time ranks up, but it was a very hectic start to this session in the last 10 minutes here for the GT4s. They're out in a force, knowing time is money, and they're about to be bankrupt with the wet weather rolling in thick and fast here, I should say, here in Paul Ricard. Looking on board then, leading the charge on the run towards the Mistral straight, Matthew Copsey with Porsche trailing on his 6 there. 2 Mercedes cars courtesy of Gonzalez and De Munster. Then behind them, Gagliolo and Wells to make our first 5 times in GT4. Things definitely looking to be a lot more intense than the last couple of qualifying sessions, knowing that they have really got to get themselves shot of the situation here, shot of each other before they get onto those flying laps. They cannot afford to hold each other up. Just looking at the session and how it unfolded towards the end of it all, Mr. Scallops in first, but surprisingly there we saw over the course of that last lap, Stephen Sutton redeems Ford's bad luck in this session and brings it to second up the road from Anthony Valorio. Dion Helgalian flanks Valorio there from behind on the second row, and Tamburini makes the top 5, Hare 6th, 9 7th, and Black in 8th. Now we see here with the GT4s on board with Matthew Copsey, currently the front runner, set to start the first of the flying laps here in what has been a very, very busy start from the GT4 field. Now you've got to consider as well the odds at play here for the number 97. Things are not looking to get any more favorable in this session for him, because the only manufacturer to be gaining weight is the one he is driving at the moment, is the Porsche 718 Cayman. So he has really got to dig deep on this opening flying lap here. We stay on board with Matthew Copsey, making his way down through the very air. As you can see, he's really giving it absolutely hell for leather here on the start of qualifying for GT4. Hugging the track limits on his way in towards the Virage de l'Hôtel. Meanwhile, there was issues in the background. White flags came out there for the number 30. That's the Alpine of Marco Gagliolo. Gonzalez and De Munster still in pursuit. You can see those 2 Mercedes cars now having given themselves ample breathing space over the course of that third sector. No one looking to hinder each other here, knowing they've effectively won maybe 2 laps of peak performance of this track before the weather starts to pound down against the surface of this FIA Grade 1 and reduce it to an ice slick. Down towards the Curb de Sang then. Bear in mind, had there been a larger, if any, presence today by McLaren on today's GT4 field, they'd have reveled in these conditions. The fastest GT4 up there with the likes of Chevrolet would have dominated down that back straight. In an era of their absence then, it's up to the European juggernauts at Mercedes, Aston Martin and Porsche to do battle here in the circuit Paul Ricard. We see down through the Virage de Bendor, now through the Curb de Garlaban. The 707 again out on track. Now, the first week this happened in Indianapolis, it was a confusing one there for Stephen Black. The second time, it does make you question what on earth is he doing. Down towards the line then, Matthew Copsey, the benchmark time for GT4s today, coming down to the line. And across the line he goes. He does actually go faster than one of the GT3s, believe that one or not. Gonzalez from behind him, then De Munster, then Wells fastest on the first flurry of flying laps here in the circuit Paul Ricard. Ginetta fastest by just under 1/10 of a second to Porsche in second place. Bear in mind, here comes the number 2 of Vladislav Mizin, leading in GT4's championship at this time. We see the Ukrainian across the line, but only 3rd fastest on his first flying laps. Bear in mind, 5 minutes to play with here before the end of the session. Across the line from behind him was Przemek Zulim, joining in late here. And just behind, physically on track, Marco Gagliolo now onto another flying lap after issues down at the Verrières. Zulim, 4th in the session for Aston Martin. Speaking of Aston Martin, Asahi Ota tucks in behind the back of the top 5 there for Division 6th place in the number 55. Gonzalez, Division 7th. Gagliolo then the only driver remaining yet to have put a time on the charts. Of course, we know the reasons behind that. Issues down at the Verrières, I believe a half spin, and you can see it there repeated on the run out through the Virage du Camp. The camera's taking a little bit of a while to track it there, but now tucking in behind the Aston Martin of Przemek Zulim. Driver who has already been outwardly critical of this track is nonetheless finding pretty solid opportunities throughout qualifying today. Finds himself in that top 5. The chances for the Polish talent to advance up to a potential podium start in division remain there. The gap between himself and Władysław Mizin currently in the range of about 117 thousandths of a second. So you see now Stephen Black finally redeems his time, but it is still very confusing that this GT3, seemingly undergoing somewhat of an identity crisis, is out in GT4's qualifying. And that's the same story for another GT3 on the field. Now, I'll be completely honest, I don't remember the last time Ferrari made a GT4 car, but hey-ho, maybe the regulations are changing. 97 coming to the line then. Can Copsey overtake Wells for the fastest time of qualifying? Yes, he can, and he goes faster again over a GT3 car. From behind him, we see De Munster and Gonzalez and Wells coming to the line. Can Wells find his way up and alongside Copsey once again? Not this time around. Matthew Copsey punching well above his weight at a track he's no doubt visited before in his time racing in Formula 1. I believe he's raced in a... does HCCL have an F1 division? I'm pretty sure they do, because Copsey, we've seen before, has raced on the EA Formula 1 games. Will have no doubt ran into the circuit Paul Ricard on a number of occasions in the last couple of years before the track's discontinuation as the French Grand Prix in 2022. So this has sort of come naturally to the 97 at this time. He makes his way onto the Mistral Straight. He's not put a foot wrong in this session. Currently finds himself up by nearly a whole second to the nearest car of this grid. That being Tom Wells. The land of the featherweights then. Porsche against all odds, and Ginetta with plenty of favours done find themselves at the front of the field. Now this is something I'm quite excited to see here. It's down the Mistral Straight. Look at how close the Mercedes and the Ginetta stay to one another. Bear in mind, Ginetta, of course we know, is one of the weakest in the straight lines on these straightaways, but is nonetheless able to religiously cycle into the slipstream there and just stay precisely behind that Mercedes, not losing much, if any, ground at all. That is going to make for a razor-thin start of things in the GT4 field, especially if he can get the run up over those Mercedes cars on the start. We know how good the gear ratios are at this time for Ginetta. Very short ratio gearbox, very punchy, almost rally car-esque. We'll see that'll make for a vibrant start from the number 12. At the moment, still finds himself upon the front row of GT4's grid. Coming down to the line next to the 97, already leading this session by a landslide. We'll have to wonder what is going to be the response by Mercedes at this time, courtesy of Władysław Mizin and Matthias de Munster. Across the line then, Copsey, by the looks of it, didn't find an improvement on that last lap. We'll see, though. The number 69... and for that matter, the number 14, Gonzalez and De Munster. De Munster now third fastest up ahead of Władysław Mizin. Tom Wells maintains his position of the field. You can see now having reeled in Matthew Copsey up to what is now a gap of just under half a second between the two. Coming to the line then, this is going to be a curious one as we head into the final laps of qualifying today. Władysław Mizin, does he go up to pole position across the line? He doesn't even advance to the podium, so he's got one more lap to play with here. This has been very surprising indeed for the GT4 Championship leader and the runner-up of the GT4 Challenge for that matter as well. We see, as a matter of fact, it's Aston Martin's Przemek Zulim that goes third fastest. Mercedes having an absolute mare here in the circuit Paul Ricard. Coming to the line, the 55. Actually, not coming to the line, sorry, I massively overestimated that one. That's well past the line as it stands. We see that pressure still at an all-time high here for Marco Gagliolo. It has not been a particularly easy qualifying session then for the Italian in the number 30 Alpine. These conditions really not playing nicely into his hands, and surprisingly still, considering it's at its home territory here. The only French race on the calendar, and the local brand here, Alpine. Factories based alongside Renault's out in Dieppe, really struggling at this time. So as we see the end of qualifying roll through, we cut away here from the Alpine, who looks to potentially put no times on the chart as we if I try and gather my words, try to catch on board with the leading car of GT4's qualifying, or what has been a sensational following act of GT3's qualifying. GT4 comes to a close here, down towards the line. Can it be an extension by Copsey as he makes his way to the line? 7.493 seconds away from the fastest of this session, and it remains there at the end of qualifying. A fantastic performance then by Porsche. What is the follow-up to be expected by Mercedes at this time? Very little, if any, here. The only Mercedes car left to fight them is going to be the number 2 next up to the line, Vladislav Mizin, currently at the back of GT4's top 5. Very peculiar signs here, and that is him showing the white flag. He is at an end there of this qualifying session. The 91 follows on his trails. Przemek Zulin with Aston Martin across the line stays third at the end of this session. Coming to the line, the 55 of Asahi Ota. We saw to be a fantastic talent in his time in the GT4 Challenge, struggles in today's sessions, and currently starts this in Division 6th. So a very bizarre end to qualifying, but one that has given us a very exciting show of things at the front of that field, both in GT3 and GT4. It's going to make for 2 fantastic grids to follow over the course of 90 minutes of racing. Next up in the session itinerary, of course, 2 mandatory pit stops to follow for both fuel and tyres here in the first 90-minute race of the season. Next one coming up will be round 7 at the Nürburgring. So before we get on to the grid for today, one article of news, and while we're not brave enough for politics here on TRTN, this was simply one article of news we thought too bizarre to ignore, and this comes from the United States, and namely from IndyCar. President Donald Trump has commissioned the creation of the Freedom 250 Grand Prix. This was later reinforced by IndyCar President Roger Penske. It's set to be one of the later rounds of this year's upcoming 2026 IndyCar Series, and it's going to be a street race at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Set as a 250th year anniversary of American independence, curiosity surrounds this event as due to the highly sponsor-intensive and, in fact, corporate-intensive nature of motorsports and motorsports branding, and that legislature in the area forbids advertisements on Capitol grounds, questions have already arose as to how exactly this ambitious concept, one personally backed by both the president of IndyCar and the president of the United States, can possibly hope to go ahead. We'll be very, very curious to monitor how this picks up in the later months of 2026. It's set to fall in and around the August slot of this year's IndyCar season. Very curious stuff indeed. Sadly, no other articles of news to go off of. That was simply one just so bizarre we couldn't help but try to cover that ourselves, our personal take of the matter. It's going to make a very interesting spectacle indeed if they are able to get that one off the ground. But of course, a lot of speculation therein still remains as to how such a thing is even possible. No, less on that, more on this. As we see now the grid lining up for round 4 of the championship. 90 minutes of racing to follow here with 2 mandatory pit stops on the first endurance race of the season here in Season 3 of the Multiclass Championship by HCCL. Mr. Scallops lines up on pole position then for the GT3 category. Alongside him, Stephen Sutton on the front row for Ford. Behind them, Ferrari's Anthony Valorio and Dion Helgelian, one of the front runners of GT3's championship. Round 1 race winner lines up on 4th place. Just outside of the front 2 rows onto the 3rd row and at the back of the top 5, Luca Tamburini turns things around for Porsche. Starts ahead of new driver Julian Hayes. Julian 9, also a new driver, starts 7th, and rounding out what is only 4 rows of the grid today for GT3 is Stephen Black in 8th place. Getting swiftly onto the conversation of GT4, lining up just behind them, 9th place and 10th as we begin the run of the 5th row. It's Matthew Copsey by a landslide, and Tom Wells makes the front row for an all-featherweight front row in GT4 in something simply unprecedented in the face of Mercedes domination so far this season. Taking a look behind, Przemek Zulin 3rd place for Aston Martin, Matthias de Munster in 4th, with Vladislav Mizin making Division 5th, Asahi Ota in 6th, with Gonzalez 7th and Gagliolo in 8th. It's 8 cars apiece then for 16 cars in all on today's grid. Let's catch on board with the pole sitter both in GT3 and outright, that being Mr. Scallops in the number 394. He'll be getting us away then for the formation lap here in Le Castellet as we get underway for round 4 of the championship. An hour and 30 minutes of racing to follow. We've got 15 seconds then before we peel away at the home of the former French Grand Prix. So taking us down through to the Verrières for the first time, we can get a bit of a slowed down tour of everything here at the circuit Paul Ricard, and we can actually start to analyse the scope of things around turn 2. Now, it's both kind of on and off camber. I think one of the most prominent factors of it is that it's actually a corner that goes up and over a crest right at the apex there, so it does make things very difficult to follow in that opening sector. That's what's led to issues already off the bat for a few drivers of today's grid. We saw over the course of qualifying led to continued troubles for Alpine's Marco Gaioliolo. That's what's led to the Italian starting 16th and 8th in division. Taking a look now, running in through the Virage de l'Hôtel, now through the Virage du Camp and the Virage de la Sainte-Baume. Now, this is where the bulk of the attention will be focused on lap-by-lap action, and it's going to be the run out through here at turn 7 onto the Mistral Straight. Without that chicane that's normally found in the French Grand Prix layout, our drivers will have quite the length here of FIA Grade 1 to give hell to leather for on the run down towards turn 8. A very fast right-hander at the Curb de Sang at turn 8. In the case of that front row, it's going to be a tough one here for anyone behind them to keep wind with it all. I do expect pretty strong stuff from the 45. The 41's still up in the air as to really if Ferrari can perform in the straightaways. It is going to be somewhat of a two-horse race when you consider Nissan and Ford are now growing to be two of the dominant figures of straight line speed. It has bled away in most recent months away from BMW and Lexus, now to being the story of Ford and Nissan. Nissan especially has been a very dark horse when it comes to straight line speed. Not many drivers have been ambitious enough in the last couple of months to run it to where the point that we don't actually have a lot of data ourselves to go off of on what is exactly the capped out straight line speed for the R35. What we have seen though across a few different series in this broadcast itinerary in the last couple of months here on TRTN is that in the straightaways, this is a serious competitor for some of the fastest cars in GT3. I believe that record is still held by Lexus, but in terms of both acceleration and top end, the Nissan is a worthy successor. Down through Le Bousset then, turn 9. It's a site of the famous Flashpoint incident in Season 8 of VSR Phoenix. Hopefully none to find themselves in a similar predicament here at the halfway mark of Season 3. Out through the Virage de Bendor. Just taking a quick look back as well. Let's go and catch on with the leading pair at the forefront of the action down in GT4. Just briefly here, we can see up on the front row, the 97 just up in front there on the number 12. Two featherweight cars at the front of GT4's field. Bear in mind, Aston Martin and Mercedes very strong in the straightaway. So for these two, they're going to have to make light work of this opening sector to get the most out of Sector 2 and 3. It's all a momentum game out past the GT3s at this time. We stay on board here. With the front of the field then for GT3. On the run down towards the line then, round 4 of Season 3 of the HCCL Multiclass Championship here for the first endurance race of the season. 90 minutes against the clock, 16 cars on the field, 8 in GT3 and 8 in GT4. Here in Le Castellet, down towards the line, and we are green and racing here in France. Here at round 4 of the championship, a brilliant start by Nissan right off the front row as it stands on the run down towards Verrières. Mr. Scallops away from Stephen Sutton. We see a great start from Anthony Valorio, one that was definitely coming as quite a surprise as he goes up the inside over Sutton through the Verrières for the first time. He'll be back to the outside at turn 2. We see things get a little bit wiry out behind them. Dion Helgelian takes a bit of a half spin, tucks in behind Julian 9. Then looking into the GT4s just briefly here, it has been a lightning offensive by that of Tom Wells, taking the lead up and away from Matthew Copsey and makes contact there with the likes of, by looks of it there, that was Julian Hayers in GT3. We see a big spillover between GT3 and GT4 at this time as things get hairy on the run down through Sector 1. Scallops breaks away then from Sutton, who holds on to second for the time being. It's Tamburini to have one of the better starts there, up to 4th in this session. Now as Helgelian drops in behind Julian 9. Bear in mind here in the straightaways, it's going to be that easy fight for Ford. Bear in mind, Ferrari's still giving him some level of grief. Will it be the case that 9 yields on the run down towards the Curb de Sang? At the moment, he doesn't have to. On the run in towards turn 8, let's see how this unfolds between the pair. By the looks of it, Helge Leon's got this one nipped in the bud. Behind him, we could see Stephen Black, but Tom Wells now being retaken for position. They're down to 9th in this race overall, but still leads in GT4. Zhemak Zulim takes up the helm of 2nd place in GT4. Vladislav Mizin up to 3rd, Asahi Ota to 4th. We see that Dennis Gonzalez up to 5th, and Matthias de Munster dropping down to 6th. Marco Gagliolo's got his hands full there. It's Matthew Copsey to have lost out the most in that opening incident. Drops down to the back of the field, Division 8th, 16th outright, as Wells is left by his lonesome to defend an imminent armada of Aston Martin and Mercedes machinery. Up at the front of the fields, we still see here going on in that fight for the podium, namely that fight for second. Scallops breaks away from Sutton. Villorio now takes up the helm of a fight of 2nd place. Tamburini's not to be counted out of this one either. He could make ample work of this if there is a mistake up in front between the Ford and the Ferrari on the run down through the Verrières. So a very hectic start to things here right off the bat as we see into the pit lane goes the 69. Matthias de Munster is in super early after a very chaotic opening lap down in GT4. Zulim already closing ground here over Wells. The Battle of Britain over the front row. Ginetta versus Aston Martin. In terms of that front-running machinery, you can see with such a great run out through the Verrières in towards Le Hotel and Camp. He's right on top now with that number 12. Bear in mind, breathing down his neck is the number 2 Mercedes. So very close action at the forefront of GT4's field at this time. You can see out back, Copsey and Gagliolo now swapping positions. As now Copsey takes up the helm of Division 6th. A far cry from where he'd like to be over the course of the first couple of laps in today's race, but one that he's going to have to work with over the course of the next hour and 26 minutes. Looking back up briefly here to the fight of 2nd place. Villorio versus Sutton. Villorio was looking to go around the outside. What was the method in all of that through turn 8? Tucks back in behind the number 7. Down through Le Bousset. The Ferrari, I must say, we did kind of count it out there on the start. I don't think I was expecting such an elbows out performance by Anthony Villorio. He has thrown caution to the proverbial wind. He is not waiting around for opportunities to fall into his lap. He is taking it by force. Now looking just back into the GT4s here as we see things get very close between Zulim and that of Mizin. We see in the, not the foreground, the background was Julian Hayes in GT3. Had trouble out through Le Bousset. And that's given enough of a smokescreen here for now, both Mizin and Ota to get the leg up over Zulim. Bear in mind, this is actually playing quite nicely into the hands of Tom Wells. As you can see, it has built somewhat of a gap as Mizin and Ota struggle to get around Zulim in that middle and final sector. So in the scope of a few battles going on at the moment in GT3, the fight of 2nd as well as the fight of 4th. So that's Sutton and Villorio for 2nd, Tamburini and Helge Leon for 4th. In the GT4 field at this time, we can see 1.8 seconds divide Wells from Mizin at this time, but I do anticipate that will quickly close itself down as now simply nothing is left to stand in the way. Meanwhile, on the road just behind them for Division 3rd, the 2 Aston Martins go head-to-head, Zulim versus Ota. The 55 and the 91. Bear in mind, about to intercept them on the run down towards Virage de l'Hotel is going to be the number 310 of Julian Hayes, having been forced down a peg there after an incident at Le Bousset. See the 2 Astons now being intercepted by the GT3 McLaren. Now, they don't have to move over. This is technically for position, so the McLaren has to make this one fair and square. There'll be no hand-holding from race control to get him up and around the GT4s up over his nose at this time. We see big wide run there on the exit of Saint-Baume for the 91. We see in the background as well, Dennis Gonzalez, I believe, just got overtaken, yes, by the Alpine of Marco Gagliolo on the exit of the Virage de la Saint-Baume. Down the Mistral straight, this is where the Alpine is at its most vulnerable. A chirpy little 1.8 litre up against a 4 litre twin turbo. In those numbers, things don't look particularly cheerful for Alpine. Nonetheless, he's put on a great fight of things so far for Division 7th. Division 6th, I should say. You can see the gap still persists there, Mizin and Wells, with that pressing factor behind him at this time, that being Hayes. We see things could get ugly between the 310 and the number 2. We see forced all the way out wide on the exit of Le Busset down towards the Virage de Bendor. As now the 310 is pushed all the way out wide. I think that's just because he's not gotten to the brakes soon enough. That's opened the doors up here for the 55 and the 91 on that second row of GT4's field. Now, I don't want to distract away from what is also going on up in GT3 at this time. Sutton and Valorio still rages on. And in the meantime, Tamburini and Helgulian swap positions for 4th place. Tamburini drops to the back of the top 5 where he started this race from. All is not yet lost for Porsche. Julian Villota, definitely a poignant conversation to be had at this time as the gap now opens up between Wells and Mizzen to 2.4 seconds between the Ginetta and the Mercedes. The opening 10 minutes then have proven to be a very solid time here in the rain for Ginetta. Behind them, Gonzalez and Gaioliolo still head-to-head here for Division 6th. But I'd say things are much likelier to see their fracture point in the fight of 4th place. The two Astons head-to-head, Julian Villota the run in towards the Virage de l'Hôtel. So a very enthusiastic start. Taking a look then at the grid as we see Mr. Scallops out in the forefront of this race. You can see from behind him, separate by half a second, Sutton from Villorio in that ongoing fight for second place in GT3. We'll stay on board with these two for just a moment's time. On with the Ford of Stephen Sutton, defending away second place at this time from the approaching Ferrari. Out through the Virage de Bendor. Turn 10, now turn 11. On the run to Virage de la Tour, turn 12. You can see just looming under the rear wing there, that Ferrari staying super, super close. Now through the Virage du Pont at turn 13. You can see in the background as well that Helgulian was able to open the gap up over Tamburini at this time. The same cannot be said of the fight going on right on our screens at the moment for second. So you see here with these two, going to see the attacking perspective of it all, if we can go and catch it with the 41 through sector 1. Really goes to show the versatility of the V8 engine, knowing that both of these cars, despite their distinctive soundtrack, whether it's American Thunder or European Scream, both of these are V8 engines. Believe that one or not. On board with Valorio then, continuing his charge up towards second. Now he's in the slipstream on Sutton. Can he hope to have a chance going into the Curb de Sang? He's around the outside. Will he be able to hold on to that one? This is going to be very ambitious by the 41. He does have to slow down. The number 7 slots back in over the nose of that Ferrari down towards Le Busset. Has that compromised his line enough for him to have another chance to attack on the exit here of what is the double apex at Le Busset? The Ferrari does have the run, but just not enough distance to close on the run towards the Virage de Bendor at turn 10. Using every available inch of the track here, we're starting to see things get very, very elbows out now between the 7 and the 41. We'll catch on with these two in a moment's time as we take a look into GT4. We see this is super, super thin now. The fight between the two Aston Martins up for division 3rd place. Przemak Julin versus Asahi Ota. We're on board with the defending Aston of 2 here. Ota in that fight for 3rd. You see Julin right on his tail. Copsey having drawn his way back into this one, I must say, is a remarkable comeback drive in just as little as the opening 20 minutes. Not even that, just the opening 10 and a half. And he's already back in to not only the top 5, but within his chances to fight on the podium. That takes some serious commitment there. The 97 didn't have the best of starts, but he can definitely turn this into one of the best ends of a race. Bear in mind, an hour and 19 minutes to go, so a lot riding on the line between these two. We see Julien looking up the inside on the run out through the Virage de la Tour. Now to the Virage Dupont. The 91 goes all the way out wide. That invites in the 97. Copsey now takes up the helm of 4th place off of Zdeněk Zulim. The Aston Martin dropping now to the back of the top 5. Asahi Ota now given a new adversary to face on that defensive fight for 3rd. Copsey moving at a fast rate of knots there. That Aston Martin is going to be looking mighty vulnerable in the next couple of laps against the advance of that Porsche. Meanwhile, just to cut away from these two to go back onto the fight at this time between the Ferrari and the Ford, the number 7 and the number 41, just as we catch them here out through the Curb de Sang down towards Le Bousset. Sutton's going to have to try and go the long way around town here over the 41 of Anthony Valorio, who's up the inside at Le Bousset. This is all of that fight for 2nd place. Can the Ford hold on to it on the run around turn 8, turn 9, now turn 10 coming up? And he does. That is remarkable stuff there by Stephen Sutton. Kept the foot in. It was all or nothing there. And he's held on to 2nd. Great defense by Stephen Sutton. You see here with Copsey's point of view now, this is in that continued fight in GT4's podium positions. To comment on how things are going up at the front of GT4, it's about a 1.5 seconds between Wells and Mizin, so that fight is definitely going to pick up at some point in the near future. As we see here, though, this is the division fight for 3rd in GT4, now from the eyes of the attacking car, this time on board with the 97 of Matthew Copsey. Started from pole in this race, now 4th, having clawed his way back up through the field from last. After a lackluster start, but things did not go particularly swell for the 97. Out through towards the Virage de la Tour. We see looking up the inside, the Porsche just has so much more bite in the corner entries there over the Aston Martin. Asahi Ota having to play very defensively, knowing pound for pound he can't outmaneuver the 97. You see he's got the run, but in the top end of things, Aston Martin does have that slight upper hand over Porsche. Will that come to be the case, as it has kept the Aston Martin close enough alongside to hold up the inside here in towards Verrières? It's going to take something very ambitious to put Copsey out in front of Ota, and as we run through turn 1, the back end swung away for the number 97. This invites in the number 91, I should mind you, as well, as we see there emerging up over the left-hand side. That bright green signifies the arrival of Zdeněk Zulim, who gets not 1 but perhaps even 2 positions on the run in towards the Virage de la Hotel. Couldn't find either of them, but it has put the Polish talent right back in the stead of that fight for 3rd place. This could be very exciting to see down the Mistral straight. We see here from the man in the middle, caught between a rock and a hard place, sandwiched between 2 Varnages on the run in towards the Mistral straight, Matthew Copsey. Aston Martin up over his nose, Aston Martin up over his tail. What can he do but stick into the slipstream, keep the foot in the bulkhead of the car and pray? That is all the 97 can do at this time. It may just be enough, but he does find himself to the outside. He's not in an advantageous spot on the run down towards turn 8. Moreover, there's the top end creeping in, and it does find him increasingly vulnerable to an advance by Zdeněk Zulim with Aston Martin, who gets the leg up over him on the run in towards turn 8. The 97 holds the inside, narrowly avoids an incident there. The 91 backs out. All the meanwhile, the 55 just gets to hold on to 3rd. Very little pressure there when those two are scrapping behind him, but he's got to keep his eyes on the road, especially with worsening conditions. One must consider it is not getting any better for these drivers today in the wet and wild conditions provided here at Le Castellet. Out through the Virage de Bendor, still on the back end of the Aston, but you can see it there in those last couple of corners, signs of desperation mounting over the 97. He's now looking for inside lines he wasn't previously considering, and now he might have to size his chances up to the Virage Dupont. It's just too far away to make any kind of headroom of that. Incredibly exciting stuff here in GT4. Just quickly having a gander over towards GT3 for a moment's time as we see heading down the Mistral straight. It comes to side-by-side action once again between the 41 and the number 7. This time much further up the road than he was the last time he attempted this maneuver. Anthony Valorio looking to go all the way around the outside here on Stephen Sutton. Down through the Curb de Sang, now to Le Bousset, but now up the inside. He's tried it from both angles here, but that number 7 is impenetrable for 2nd place. It is absolutely iron wall defense here by Ford to hold on to second over Ferrari. This has also allowed a little bit of extra leeway in to the number 45 of Helge Lien to start making ground back up to a potential podium charge. Looking back into that GT4 fight as we clear Sector 1 here. Ota, having broken away 1.2 seconds off of Matthew Copsey, now has to find himself in a position to defend in the near future. He's out of that slipstream created by the number 55, I should say. That allows the number 91, who very much has the slipstream off of him, to start making up solid ground in Sector 2 and 3. Back in with these two, side by side on the run down the Verrières. Turns 1 and 2. Diverse lines there between the pair. The 41 in full attack mode now. Valorio not giving up until he has second place under his belt. On the run in towards the Virage de l'Hotel. Backs out of a potential move up the inside. Knows that it just wouldn't net him the move whatsoever. That would be suicide to attempt. The Ferrari playing things very hard but very fair on the run through Sector 1. So, we quickly tune back in with the GT4s, but now we'll go to get onboard footage with either side of this fight here. On with the attacking point of view, the Ferrari of Anthony Valorio in pursuits of second place once again. Back on board with these two in what has been one of the closest, if not the closest fights in the GT3 grid today. Bear in mind, look at the gap between himself and Helge Lien. That was 2.5 seconds last time we checked, and now it is only 2 seconds. It was actually closing in on 1.9 seconds for but a moment there. Valorio, third time's the charm here, now finds himself to the inside, but is there going to be enough room to find it? Up the inside all the way through turn 8, the number 7 goes super late on the brakes to hold on to position, but can it be enough this time around? He tried once, he tried twice, now on the third go around, it simply is not the case. It is impossible to break a line in over that number 7. I mean, hats off here to Stephen Sutton. This is one of the strongest defensive performances I think we've seen in a long time. Perhaps one of the strongest defenses we've seen this season alone. You can see, though, the 41 is not laying up. He is now totally tunneled in on the pursuit of second place over that Ford. Valorio will not rest until he sees it. He's driving like a man possessed now. I have never seen such fervor behind the wheel. He's got the run out through the Virage du Pont on the run down towards the Verrières. Down towards turn 1, then turn 2. Of course, going for the later apex. Sutton holds the inside. Out through turn 2. Momentum just simply not to Ferrari's aid when it comes to going toe-to-toe with Ford and their monstrous 5.4 litre. They just can't seem to hack it. Engine power alone will not win this fight, as we've seen time and time again. These two drivers very closely matched for ability on this track in these conditions. They found themselves really the unstoppable force meets the immovable object at this time. It's only a matter of time until something properly kicks off between these two. I'm calling it now. Something is going to happen, and it ain't going to be pretty when it does. Looking down the Mistral Straight, still looking for a bare headspace here. Up over the number 7. Again, trying for the outside. It's a risky move by Valorio, but you can see he's got a lot more ground up the road than he's had the last couple of times he's attempted this one. Giving space up the inside, but he runs out wide through the Curb de Sang, and the number 7 retakes second place once again. Cutting away from these two to quickly get a scope of things from throughout the field, we see that the number 97, what's happened to the 97 here? It's actually dropped in behind Matthias de Munster, and that's because Matthew Copsey went and took his first mandatory pit stop. So too has de Munster, so these two have strategic advantage now in the next couple of laps over the rest of the GT4 grid at this time. What does that leave the rest of the grid looking like at the moment? Well, Vladislav Mizin and Tom Wells still fight at the front row of things, and after a little bit of a spry run, I should say, through Sector 1 there, the Ginetta is getting increasingly vulnerable to an advance by Mercedes, now especially as we hit the Mistral Straight with nothing to cover off the Ginetta by slipstream. That Mercedes, they would just hook on to the G55 and start reeling him in, and this is really where we start to see it. Mizin closing in at a fast rate of knots here on board with the Mercedes. And looking to go side by side. He could have this move just before we hit turn 8. And it very much looks to be the case here for Division First, as now he's up and ahead of Wells. What can the Ginetta do to fight him back on the run out through turn 8 in towards turn 9? We know how aggressive it can be under brakes. Looking up the inside on the number 2, but it's just snipped off there on the first run of 3 in through Le Bousset. Heading down towards the Virage du Pendor. Tom Wells is not letting go of his chances here. He's held on to that race lead. There's nothing to say that he can't do it again, but that Mercedes did look like it was approaching, whether he liked it or not. Into the pit lane goes the 41, Anthony Valorio, in for his first mandatory pit stop after 22 minutes of racing. With that first wad of mandatory pit stops coming in over the course of the last 5 or so minutes, things are definitely looking interesting for the rest of the grid at this time. We see a great exit of the Virage du Pont, but that Ginetta, with its 3.7 litre Ford Cyclone engine, going toe-to-toe with a 4 litre. He's got him on the short term, but as we get up into the top gears on these gearboxes here, that's where Mercedes is able to reel him back in. We see the Ginetta really trying for it. Here's super late on the brakes and around the outside back into the lead of GT4. What a move by Wells. Very nearly snipped across the back end there by Mizin on the exit of Verrières. That was really something. Get a look at that on the replays just quickly. Out through turn 1 and 2. Just looking on the live footage as well. Was very nearly side-by-side action on the run-in through the Virage de la Hotel. That was unbelievable guts there from Wells to retake position off of Mizin. Most would consider that impossible, borderline suicidal. The number 12 is willing to accept those risks head on. So very, very curious stuff indeed. Now, this was the area that Mizin was able to catch up Wells on the last lap just gone. We'll see exactly that point, as we see currently in 6th. And now this is really where it picks up. He's in 6th. He's all the way in the red. And that Ginetta, it's just bottomed out a few miles an hour less. And that's what allows Mizzi to just cruise on by. Bye-bye, number 12, says the number 2. And the number 12, great run out through the curb to Sang, looking up the inside at Le Bousset. So he's not going anywhere. Tom Wells looking at again reclaiming the lead of GT4, and that he does out through turn 9 into turn 10 at Le Bousset, down towards the Virage de Pendor. The number 12 back into the lead. This is absolutely sensational stuff at the forefront of GT4. Mizin v Wells, David and Goliath, as it were. That Ginetta, never expected to be competitive alongside Mercedes, is taking them for ransom in the opening 30 minutes of racing here in round 4. Catching up with some of the other fights on field at the moment, we now see a new fight into the play here, where it was the 41 versus the 7. We now see it's the 45. Dion Helgalian versus Stephen Sutton. 2 Fords in arms here. Very nearly contact on the exit of Le Bousset, down towards the Virage du Pendor. So you see the 45 runs out wide. The number 7 still holding on to 2nd place. He's already taken on one car. There's nothing to say he can't take on another in what has been so far steadfast defense of the podium. Very wide there on the Virage de la Tour, but I believe that could be the preceding runs here on a run into the pit lane for the 45. The exit. The Virage du Pont, neither of them take a swing to the pit lane, so curious case indeed there for the 2 Mustangs on the podium. Jem-Max Zulem into the pit lane as well for GT4 at this time. Getting a look back on board then with these two. Mizin v Wells in what has been spectacular racing here in the opening 25 minutes of round 4. Let's go and catch on board as it stands with that titular Ginetta. We see, oh, that's trouble there for, that's Julian Hayes. That's a free position up for Anthony Valorio after his first mandatory pit stop. Making leeway up through the field here. This is again at Le Bousset. It's been an area that the 310 has struggled at on a number of occasions. Looking on board then, Mizin in the background gets a bit squirrely on the exit of turn 8 in towards turn 9 at Le Bousset. We're on board at the moment with the leading GT4, has on several occasions fought this one back from the number 2. It's the number 12 Ginetta of Tom Wells in the lead at the moment, still defending first place away from the advancing number 2. Punchy little motor in that car as well. is into the pit lane then after what has been a series of unfortunate events so far for the 310 McLaren on his first race in the season. I believe that might have actually been a retirement. Yeah, the 310, by the looks of it there, is out after his first race in. You can see in the time since, especially over that last lap, Wells has broken 1.6 seconds away from Mizin as Ota peels into the pit lane. Gonzalez looks to potentially take up the helm of third on this grid. That he does in the number 14 Mercedes. But really, the talk of the day has been the fight here between Mercedes and Ginetta. It was previously Porsche and Ginetta for the race start. Then, as Tom Wells took the lead amidst a chaotic start where there was a huge spillover between the GT4 and GT3 field down through the Virage de la Hotel at lap 1 of this race, Wells has took the baton and absolutely sprinted with it here. Not a single car has been able to hold a candle over that Ginetta since the word go. And namely, especially after that incident at the Virage de la Hotel. From that point on, he has dominated this field. And I would say this has definitely put a bit of a chill in the spine of what is otherwise a icy cool performance of the number 2 of Vladislav Mizin. It takes a lot to make him yield in any regard. We saw that he was the scourge of the GT4 Challenge grid, and he shared the grid with Wells on a number of occasions throughout that season. I think this has definitely come as quite a surprise then to the runner-up of that season to see Wells not only leading this race, but leading it comfortably in that Ginetta, a car that, again, hate to sound like a broken record, was never expected to be competitive. It's been the perfect storm of conditions and BOP to put the G55 at the forefront of this field. And on performance like this, I don't want to speak too soon, but it's race-winning material if the first 28 minutes of this race have been anything to go off of. So looking at the field so far, as we take a look around, we've got a myriad of changes in terms of the order, and that's been reinforced by the first run of those 2 mandatory pit stops. Still in the lead of this race then, Mr. Scallops in the 394. Sutton still holds on a second. Tamburini now advances to third. Julian 9 up to fourth. Helgalian in fifth. Stephen Black in sixth. And as I see there, now shifts around. Helgalian is in seventh. Velorio sixth. And Black in fifth. So we see behind them there an ongoing fight between 2 of the cars who have already taken mandatory pit stops, Matthias de Munster and Matthew Copsey. More on that in a moment's time, though. Into the GT4 field, leading that charge is Tom Wells by 2.2 seconds over Vladislav Mizin. Dennis Gonzalez in third place with Marco Gaioliolo in fourth. Asahi Ota having taken their first mandatory pit stop in fifth, with Zhemak Zulim in sixth. Matthias de Munster in Division 7th, and Matthew Copsey makes Division 8th. Anthony Velorio now advances to 5th in this race after overtaking Stephen Black down the Mistral straight. You can see behind him that fight going on as now it comes to a head. Copsey up and ahead of de Munster for 7th in the GT4s. Looking like de Munster could potentially re-engage up the inside there through Le Bousset. Couldn't find any room of it on the run in towards now the Virage de Bendour turn 10. Into the pit lane then, after what was a fantastic defensive second so far, is Stephen Sutton. He'll be hoping to emerge from the pits ahead of the 41, currently on their way down through the Virage de la Tour. Very closely timed, though, here for Sutton, and he has spent a lot of time fending off his fellow man and machine. Will it be a case here that the 41 may have a chance to take position off of him? It's looking very, very likely here. The number 7 is still yet to drop off the jacks, yet Velorio manages to take position after his first mandatory pit stop. So strategically, Sutton now drops in behind Velorio. And moreover, nearly gets clipped there. Have a look at that on the replay. How close there was Copsey to clipping the nose off of that Mustang. Just looking as well in their fight. This is the fight that it was in question. De Munster versus Copsey, super close. Oh my word. That is unfathomably close. Oh, it's an incident there, though, as we catch back on board with Copsey and de Munster. Very laggy one. Not a lot that we could pick apart there, but down through the Virage de la Hotel, more incidents arise. This time between De Munster and Copsey, catching the tail end of it there was Sutton. A little bit of a knock on the number 7, drops in front of Dion Helgeley, and these two still set to fight inside of the top 5. Meanwhile, the race leader for GT3, Mr. Scallops, is in, and that's the same story for one of the front runners of GT4, Vladislav Mizin. No word yet on the race leader for GT4, though. Tom Wells remains out on the field on his run to the Virage de la Hotel. So a very, very compelling opening 30 minutes of racing here in the first endurance race of the season of Season 3 of the Multiclass Championship. In the pit lane then, Scallops. Also joining him now at the front of the field, Luca Tamburini. A solid stint amidst concerns for stability of that number 813 Porsche. Now he'll drop down a few positions under strategy, namely to Valorio, and by potentially there that proxy to Sutton and Helgeley. And Julian 9 still yet to have pitted at this time. Currently finds themselves in 4th place. A bit of oversteer. It started as understeer, actually, then oversteer in that number 79. You can see, again, that creeping in, and I'm pretty sure that's as clear a sign as ever to come into the pit lane and take some new tyres on that number 79. Very nearly clips the inside barriers there on the run into the pit lane. Nonetheless, in goes Julian 9. Meanwhile, Scallops has already emerged back in the lead of things here, with Anthony Valorio moving up to 2nd. For Stephen Sutton, he remains on the podium, but now has to fight tooth and nail for a lower position than when he started. He'll not be happy with the fact that he now finds himself 9.7 seconds from the position he spent the entirety of that first stint defending with his heart and soul, but now has to defend for nonetheless what is a podium position, now this time away from Dion Helgelien. You see the number 12, I believe this is, yes, coming into the pit lane now, Tom Wells. That leaves opportunities open here under strategy at this time. Does Gonzalez stay out or follow in? Gagliolo a little too far away to make that decision and still gain advantage of it, but nonetheless, he's got clear open air now after what was a bit of a topsy-turvy start, as it were, for Alpine. Really, the focal point is going to be on Mizin. As can he have Wells over strategy? That number 12 is into the pit lane at this time. And I must say, it's been a brilliant strategy so far today by Anthony Valorio. He's made very, very light work of it there. I thought, really, we were going to see another chapter where he was trailing on the back end of the number 7, but he's been playing the thinking man's game. Whilst we've been playing checkers, he's been playing chess. And that is one of the key attributes to study when wanting to become a driver on a grid like this. You've got to get that one nailed down to a fine art. We see trouble, though, for Julian 9. Drive-through penalty for speeding in the pit lane for the number 79. And we see here, I think this could very well be the case, as just emerging from the pit lane with that number 2 very close behind, mind you. That was by a hair's width on the exit for Tom Wells. In terms of the GT4 grid, he emerges currently 3rd of it at this time, but will be moving back up into the lead of the GT4 grid later on in this race. Dennis Gonzalez takes provisional lead before his first mandatory pit stop, and Marco Gagliolo moves up to 2nd. Tom Wells, though, was the focal point. As we see there, the gap, what was previously 20 seconds between himself and Vladislav Mizin, has now dropped to only 1.6 seconds. We saw how brazen the fighting was getting there, how many exchanges there were between the Mercedes and the Ginetta, with every chance for that to happen. Again, we are in for one hell of a show before the next run of the pit lane. 55.5 minutes. This has been so far one of the best races of the season on all fronts here, despite the fact that we've had a smaller grid than expected. Only 8 cars in GT3. That's now down to 7 with the exit of the number 310, and 8 cars in GT4. It's really a case here of valuing quality over quantity, where we could have definitely grids of up to 40 cars when you've got grids of drivers that are going so close to one another and so hell for leather for action throughout the race. You really could trade that in a heartbeat for grids larger than it. You see running all the way out wide at Le Bousset, though. That is Vladislav Mizin. Big trouble for the number 2. That's going to create even more of a gap at this time between himself and Wells. With Anthony Valorio now up over his nose, he's got the chance to pick up just a little healthy dose of slipstream. That's if he can stay with the 41, as it really doesn't look to be sticking around for too long on the run towards the Virage de la Tour at turn 12. See on the exit of turn 13, Virage Dupont. That number 41 now passing up the soon-to-be returning leader of GT4, the number 12. Now, in terms of the gap between himself and Mr. Scallops, it's 8.5 seconds. With 54 minutes left to go, the chances still remain there for the 41 to catch, but it's going to take a lot now from here to the end of the race for him to catch up to the leading Nissan. It looks to be, on the way things have been going so far, a hat-trick on the horizon for Mr. Scallops. For Anthony Valorio, he's done more than enough in his fight with Stephen Sutton. You could see lurking there in the background on the exit of Verrières as the camera's panned out wide. The number 7 now 9.3 seconds away from the 41. In terms of the war between the two Astons, Julim and Ota has now thinned out quite some distance. 4.3 seconds between the 91 and the 55 at this time. Sahi Ota having trouble in the wet here. Now, this is definitely a bizarre turn of events considering his last time in wet weather conditions, but admittedly, you could definitely make the argument it was on a track that he'd be a lot more familiar with at Monza as opposed to here at Le Castellet. Not a lot of drivers we know of that have significant experience at this track. Of course, plenty have visited, plenty have raced on a number of occasions, but very few find themselves actively teetering towards racing at Le Castellet. It still finds itself in an odd spot. I would personally say this is still a fantastic circuit, often overhated for reasons no one seems to be able to explain the majority of times. That's not to say every criticism of the track is unwarranted. There definitely are some points to be raised about this circuit, but in terms of how sort of reviled this circuit is, I don't think that it deserves the hatred. All things considered, it's a fantastic circuit, great for endurance racing. As we've seen in the European Le Mans Series, does provide some great action there. It's provided some great action today. So really, it's a case where any naysayers to whether or not this track is good or not, I want to really take a look at how things have been going in GT4 and question that again. So we see here, Demonstrative Copsey, 1.3 seconds between the pair now. Unlikely for there to be active re-engagement of this fight. We saw how things panned out the last time. And with Copsey still looking to make headway over the number 69, who have a long way before it. We see into the pit lane at this time, Dennis Gonzalez, the number 14, is in. Now that promotes Tom Wells and Vladislav Mizin up a position. We see it's contact, though, between Mizin and Sutton down through the Verrières. Look at this on the replays here. The number 7 up the inside on the number 2. As we caught on board with Mizin just after we were watching there with Gonzalez. We see here down through turn 1. Sutton up the inside there, clips Mizin. There's a bit of a squeeze between the pair, and that spun him all the way around. That has not gone particularly swell for Stephen Sutton at this time. On board with the race leader here, Mr. Scallops, 7.8 seconds. Now, I want to point this out. That gap has drawn in dramatically in the last time we've seen it there. That's up by easily seconds now between Valorio and Scallops. The chances are absolutely there. Maybe it's a case of a bit of ebb and flow at play here, somewhat of a long-winded concertina effect. But that definitely did draw in from what was upwards of nearly 9 seconds between the pair on the last observation. For it to have drawn into the sub-8 second margin does show positive trends here coming up for Valorio. He does have the pace for it, but now he needs to prove in the next 50 minutes he's got both strategy and consistency in equal respects to take that position for his own. In the meantime, then, Gonzalez drops in behind Copsey and De Munster, now dropping to Division 8th. These two now fighting for Division 6th. Tom Wells, he's 1.3 seconds still up the road from Vladislav Mizin, but still yet to see into the pit lane as Marco Gaioliolo at the forefront of GT4's field today. The number 30 down towards Verrières continues his run of things into lap 18. So looking around the grid to see where the nearest fights will be coming from, we have seen a few of them already suggested. We are seeing a bit of a bizarre one here. Zhemak Zulim chasing down Julian 9. This is a fight for 9th on the field between a GT4 and a GT3, and dare I say it, the GT3 is struggling out through the Virage de la Tour. Now through the Virage Dupont, the 91 has to run all the way outside to avoid contact there, but nonetheless takes 9th place. Now, very clearly in the straightaways, you can see that Ferrari just peels away. Bye-bye, off he goes. But it's in the corners. Just stay on board here. It's a very bizarre one. We'll have a look with the rest of the grid in a moment's time. On board with Zhemak Zulim in the 91. Now, I want to focus namely on the run-in towards the Virage de la Tour, the Virage du Camp, and the Virage de la Saint-Baume. As is that going to be an area where 9 runs into even more trouble? You can see there. So far, so good. But these two have been too close to one another now for it to be a fluke. See there, those little micro corrections from the Ferrari. It's stepping out on the run out through the Virage de la Saint-Baume. So for Zulim, he is actually able to find solid ground over the Ferrari, namely in the more corner-intensive sections of the track, Sector 1, Sector 3 being those points. That is a curious case indeed. Back on with some of the other fights then. So you see here, Copsey v de Munster, also to be considered as Wells v Mizzen. We see Mizzen in the background taking another wide run of things out through turn 8 at the Curb de Sang. We see, though, reciprocated through turn 9. Le Busset out wide for the number 12. Number 2 now 1.2 seconds clear. We'll have a look with Copsey and de Munster. They're side by side on the run down towards the Curb de Sang at turn 8. And it looks like the Porsche might have the run here over the Mercedes. What is the rebuttal to be expected by Matthias de Munster? Good run of things out through the Curb de Sang. A little bit of curve there between the pair of them. That does slow them down just a tad on the run in towards Le Busset. Can the Mercedes look up the inside? The Porsche runs out wide, so the chances are absolutely there. A great fight back for 6th. This could actually be for 5th now, looking at it. No, it is for 6th at this time between Copsey and de Munster. Having a look here. Marco Gagliolo in the pit lane, so this could upgrade to potentially 5th, depending on how quickly the Alpine can get shot of the pit lane. Out through Virage de la Tour. This has been a great exchange so far. We caught on with them right at the apex of their fight on the run down towards turn 8 on the Mistral straight into Curb de Sang. Now on the exit of Virage du Pont at turn 13, back onto another flying lap here in this race so far, and it looks like both of them might just get the leg up over Gagliolo. Yes, that is the case. So Wells moves into the lead, Miz into 2nd, and then looking further down the line, Zulim to 3rd, Ota to 4th, Munster to 5th. Right now, Copsey has a chance of making that 5th place for himself. De Munster is going to have to put on quite the defense on the run in towards the Virage de la Hotel. Fortunately, he's got the inside over the 97, but the 97 has got formidable stopping power on the run in towards Virage de la Hotel. Now the Virage du Camp. This has been a brilliant saga so far here into the 2nd stint of 3. On board then, we'll stay with Matthew Copsey in this continued fight of Division 5th. He's got the run in the slipstream on the 69 again, so finds himself to the inside. You see here, we get in towards that top end. That's where the Mercedes is able to stay with. And it looks like in this case, on the run down towards the Curb de Sang, there is definitely a great chance. Meanwhile, yellow flags up in front of them. The number 79 of Julian 9 in trouble as Copsey takes position before we even hit turn 8. Now, this is an area of the track he made mistakes on before. Is he going to be looking to get into the same kind of trouble again? Not this time around. Matthew Copsey learns quickly from his mistakes of the last lap just gone and holds on to 5th on the run in towards the Virage de Bendor at turn 10. So we'll have a look at things in just a moment's time when we get onto the 3/4 of an hour mark, getting in towards the halfway mark of this race so far. What has been a brilliant saga here in round 4. You'll have to forgive me for the continued clearing of my throat. I am definitely coming down with something. I've been speaking about it over the last couple of days. Definitely starting to come down with something. Worst time for it as well. 7 events coming up next week. Very long into February for us. 7/10 of a second on the run in towards Verrières, turn 1 and 2.
You're halfway through, keep pushing. Saw that little bit of a frame stutter, confusing stuff indeed. The number 69 still on the tail here of the 97 with chances to dive for the inside on the run to the Virage de la Hotel. Does Matthias de Munster take his initiative? Not this time around. So as we stay on board with these two in their continued fight of Division 5th, taking a look around the grid, Mr. Scallops continues to lead now by 8.1 seconds, so the gap starting to stabilise in his favour away from Anthony Valorio in second place. Dion Helgalian makes third ahead of Stephen Sutton in fourth, Luca Tamburini in fifth, then into GT4 as we find here the leading car, Tom Wells, now sixth overall in this race. He's ahead of Vladislav Mizin in Division 2nd, Julian in Division 3rd, Ota Division 4th, Julian 9, currently Division 6th, but 10th overall on today's field. That's with chances to retake position over Asahi Ota there. We can see the 79 has had quite a few issues over the course of this race so far as we catch back on board with Copsey v de Munster. These two fighting for Division 5th. Copsey currently Division 5th, de Munster Division 6th. Gonzalez Division 7th, we saw into the pit lane. At the back of the GT4s at this time, but having taken their final pit stop, now cleared for the next 43 minutes of racing is Marco Gaioliolo with Alpine, Stephen Black at the back of the GT3 field. And at the back of the field overall, still yet to serve either of those mandatory pit stops, with the 707 still out on track. Just monitoring the maps at this time. Namely, trying to keep an eye out for the position of that number 2. Now, I'm very curious to see whereabouts is Vladislav Mizin. Now, he was hidden on the radars there behind the 813. You can see physically on track, trailing in the midst there of Luca Tamburini, but that's actually held him up now to a gap of 3.5 seconds. So the signs are definitely pointing in the direction, dare I say it, of a Ginetta win in this championship. This could be something that Tom Wells has been hunting down here on HCCL as far back as the GT4 Challenge, and with every chance for him to take a win here in Season 3, it's now or never. Looking around the field as we see closing in on Julian 9. Again, this is such a bizarre spectacle to see a GT3 fighting with the GT4s. That really is going a long way to describe the difficulties experienced so far by 9 on his first race this season. In that number 79 Ferrari has been incredibly wiry. We see in chat there, Christian LeBay tuning in to the Twitch chat saying, never thought Ginetta had a chance to win on a speed-focused track like Paul Ricard. It is really something. Indeed it is. I mean, it's such a bizarre spectacle to see. Moreover, going toe-to-toe with a driver like Vladislav Mizin, a driver with already proven talent on this field. Now, that's not to take away from Tom Wells. He is a very, very solid driver, easily in that top 5 conversation in terms of what he's been able to do for Ginetta. When you look at it on paper, you get two very solid drivers, drivers with experience with each other, drivers with experience in GT4. You put them head-to-head, and when you look at just the data on the cars alone, you would think, and you'd not be wrong for thinking, that Ginetta wouldn't hold a candle to Mercedes. But it's the perfect storm here in round 4 that has created these conditions to give Wells his best possible chance in this season for a race win. In a season that has, over the course of the last couple of weeks, been dominated in GT4 by Mercedes-AMG, courtesy of 2 wins by Mizin and a most recent win in Indianapolis by Matthias de Munster, no one had it coming here into the halfway mark that Ginetta would be the next manufacturer to take command of GT4. Of course, with 40 minutes to the line, anything can and still will happen on today's grid, so never hold your breath to one conclusive answer. Looking around the field then, in terms of nearby fights, really we are without many considerations left. We see Copsey having dropped down quite a considerable distance now from de Munster. Actually, just to take a look on a wider scale here, you can see that the reason behind that is Matthias de Munster has gone in and taken their final mandatory pit stop. So cleared to the line for the next 40 minutes. He tucks in just over the nose here, that number 7. That's Stephen Sutton in 4th place in GT3. Now, what is the method to the madness here by the number 69 of Matthias de Munster? Evidently looking at a chance of an undercut. We've seen undercuts to be quite a powerful tool on today's grid with just how short that pit lane is and how short the pit stops often do take. Of course, with both fuel and tyres, that gives them in the ballpark of about 15 to 20 seconds therein, which they are at full stop, having the car worked on, having new tyres fitted, having more fuel added. And then you've got to factor in the run in and out of the pits with things very short on this particular configuration of Paul Ricard, where we aren't using the run in out through the Virage de la Tour like we do at the French Grand Prix. It does cut down the amount of time spent wasted in the pit lane. And that means when you play your cards right, such has been the case for the 41, it is a very, very powerful overtaking device. And that's what's been able to forge out such a considerable gap now between himself and the nearest car. Helge Leon is currently on his way halfway down through the Mistral Straight as Anthony Valorio makes his way into Le Busset. So really, strategy has played such a heavy hand in this. And I want to point this out. We spoke of the gap not long ago, how close that was and how it was drawing in quite quickly. I want to pick that conversation back up where we last left it, because it was looking to stabilize itself at about 8.1 seconds. It's 6.8 now. I'm a little worried for the sake of that 394, because if this is the trend we're following off of, the 41 stands sizable chance to intercept by the end of this race. Meanwhile, looking at those GT4s, it's 3.3 seconds between Wells and Mizin. Ginetta, well within their chances today for race wins in GT4. We'll wait to see it though, 38 minutes from the checkered flag. So at this time, nearest fights on track is again happening in this very bizarre crossover point. Zdeněk Žulim technically under attack for overall 8th place by Julian 9. Now this does little to affect his standing in the GT4s. He's still on for a podium today with Aston Martin. But this really only concerns overall 8th place, that if that's even a metric he'd be gunning for in today's race, that was what was going to constitute a fight. In terms of the rest of the field, though, those nearest fights, they've all but dissipated in the very bizarre conditions given to us today here in Le Castellet. There is still that conversation to be had about Matthias de Munster and Marco Gagliolo's ambitious strategy to go very early onto that second pit stop. We'll wonder, really, especially in the case of that 69, his efforts were to be up and alongside the 97 for a division top 5 by the end of this race. Has this potentially short-sold him of his opportunity to do so? That's the real question. When you take a look at the gaps here between himself and Matthew Copsey, I mean, we're looking in and around the ballpark here of, this is well north of 30 to 40 seconds. We see even more trouble for the 79. Yellow flags out at the moment. This is just on the run into the pit lane. Has he run out of fuel? This is slowed to a crawl here for Julian 9. He is now technically in the pit lane. But the car's just come to a complete dead stop for 9 in the number 79 car. He's back into the pit lane. He'll be held there for quite some time. We're back into green flags until that point. But I believe, looking at it there, that looked like the engine ran out of fuel. That is a very, very bizarre thing to see, especially on this race. And we did say as well that some of the drivers might be trying to min-max the amount of fuel they stick in the car, knowing they'll be refueling them at every pit stop. I think maybe there's been a slight miscalculation for Julian 9. And that's what's led to his Ferrari running out of fuel before he's come in to refuel it on his second pit stop. We saw him made his way in. I'm pretty sure that was only really brought about by the fact that it had only just dawned on him that it was about to run out of fuel. That's what it looked like. Of course, we could be proven wrong since. We'll be curious to know exactly what did happen for the number 79, but it definitely looked like the telltale signs we had seen before, that it had just run out of fuel. Not the first time, I should mind as well, that a car has run out of fuel, especially from Ferrari, for that matter. I think we saw from Regent, otherwise John O'Driscoll, in the Red Bull Ring round of this season of VSI, ran out of fuel during that race. And we do note as well the Ferrari engines, they're definitely a little bit on the juicier end. It is that twin turbo V6. Same underpinnings as the engine used in the 499p, so I'm told. Looking at the gap, just to get a quick reminder as to where it sits there between Scallops and Valorio, 6.3 seconds. So again, a continued positive trend at this time between Nissan and Ferrari. Now we must consider as well, up over the front row at this time for GT3, they still have one mandatory pit stop still left to serve. So there is still strategy to be had here. We've seen how cunning things have been in the first half of the race so far for Valorio. There is every chance to prove that he could do it 2 times on the trot in the pit lane here. Could that be what he's aiming for over Scallops at this time? Get him on the undercut and then hell for leather in the last 30 minutes of racing, with every chances then that Ferrari could see their first race win of the season. It has definitely been a major upset to the status quo, reinforced by 3 major manufacturers over the course of this season so far, in what 3 rounds we've had throughout our run of Barcelona, Watkins Glen and Indianapolis. Looking back to those race wins, of course, Mizin took 2 of the 3 available wins so far in GT4. For Mercedes-AMG, they've dominated throughout GT4, and Ginetta now stand as the bulwark to upset what has been a finely curated balance by Mercedes-AMG in the GT4 class for the last 3 weeks. In terms of GT3, Ferrari could be joining their ranks if Valorio is to deliver on this sensational potential undercut strategy for the lead. Until that point, it still looks like it could be 3 on the trot here for Mr. Scallops, continuing to open the taps up over his lead of the championship. But all will be revealed in due course. In the pit lane still, then, the 79 yet to have been released, but so I'm told. I think he has just come out onto the track, so the 79 is back into the charge, which we'll come to see here. There is Julian 9 back out on the field after a very confusing fuel-related incident. No news then from the GT4 field, but we do see Valorio beginning the first part of his major plan. Now into the pit lane he goes. This is going to be the proceedings of that undercut strategy. It was about 6.3 seconds when he dived for the pit lane. We saw in the background as well for a moment there was the yellow flags out. It was for the number 30 of Marco Gaioliolo. Now into the pits we see here, the 41. And we'll see exactly how that picks up later on down the line. You see here with Vladislav Mizin, that gap now having opened up to 4.3 seconds. It does not look to be the case here that Mizin is going to be able to simply reel in that Ginetta. He's been given a very, very good run for his money in this race. And has it been the case that in conditions like today's here in Le Castellet, in the pouring wet, that Mercedes has met its match from a very unlikely face of this field, that being the Ginetta G55. Very likely so. We also see in the pit lane at this time, Luca Tamburini joins Anthony Valorio. As Valorio is cleared for exit, he's on his way out. We go to catch on with the 41 here. We see the number 813 coming in, but there is the 41. Anthony Valorio out on track at this time. Drops only down to 4th place on the exit of the Verrières. This is going to be quite the curious one to see. Now, of course, we'll be waiting to see what that response is from the 394 at the forefront of this race at the moment. That's Mr. Scallops with Nissan, hunting down his 3rd race win in a row, of course, on championship defence from his GT3 title in Season 2 of the Multiclass. Looking to make this one 2 on the trot. Does he come into the pit lane on this lap? Not this time around, so he stays out, knowing that he's got to really make the most of the next couple of laps here before he comes into the pit lane, knowing that he stands to be vulnerable if he is to be held up in traffic, and really looking at the road ahead of him, it is not a particularly hopeful sign. We know he has the pace for it. Fastest lap of any one driver on this track over the course of this race today. 2 minutes, 727, I should say. But with a huge wad of GT4 traffic up in front of him, and moreover, lapped GT3s in that mix as well, this could prove to be the buffer zone necessary to bring the 41 into the front row fight. He's been second in this race for some time, leveraging a good strategy in the first half. Could this be his master plan coming to fruition? We see held up there on the run in towards the Mistral straight by the 55 of Asahi Ota. Mr. Scallops breaks free on the run down the Mistral. Into the pit lanes then, the two Mustangs, Helgalian and Sutton. Bear in mind, this is the sort of first key stage of the master plan here for the 41. He'll be overtaking these two, leaving nothing left in the sights between himself and the front of the GT3 field. As he overtakes both Sutton and Helgalian, back up to second then for Valorio. It does raise a very curious question, but with the 394 so far up the road, will it be a case that by the time he comes into the pit lane, there'll still be about half a lap between those two? We see running very wide there through the Virage de Bandor at turn 10. Now through turn 11 at Garlaban. Will it be a case that as Valorio runs effectively in parallel to the pit lane on the run down the Mistral straight, will there be enough time to make his way all the way around Sector 3 and catch up to the 394? We'll see though. So we see exiting the Virage DuPont into the pit lane, then enacting his response to a potential undercut strategy. Mr. Scallops is in with Nissan. So this is where it could all come apart in the competition, really, for that front row. Major stakes then at play here for GT3. We see meanwhile in the pit lane comes Vladislav Mizin, as Tom Wells now gunning for an overcut to stay in the lead of this race. Asahi Ota now takes up the helm of second in GT4. Zulim and Copsey both into the pit lanes at this time. Gonzalez yet to respond. Valorio down towards Le Busset. The 394 is still in. Bear in mind, when he drops off of those jacks, it is but meters between himself and the pit limit line. So he'll be off the jacks, right onto the line there and gone with the win. So it is really all or nothing now. In through the Virage de Bandor. The 394 was just snapping between these two because we know this is what could decide the race lead between the two GT3s at the forefront of fighting today. Nissan versus Ferrari. Down through Virage de la Tour on the run in towards the Virage DuPont. This is where it could all change. Off the jacks goes the 394 just as we make our way round turn 13. He's released out of the pit lanes, the number 41. What is the change in time between these two as he crosses the line there? The data not super accurate to give us anything, but out through Verrières, you can see not too far away at all is Valorio. But has it been a case where that's been an improvement or a detriment here? 26 minutes to the line. Now with Scallops on brand new tyres. He's made the most of it of his attempts there, but an unsuccessful one at that. We'll wait to see what the data tells us precisely, but Mr. Scallops maintains his lead of the race. A successful overcut at this time, but what has it done for the gap between himself and Valorio? It was previously 6.3 seconds. Now it's 6.1. So still positive incline for the gap there, or positive decline, or I'm not really sure how you can word it. Regardless, gap getting smaller in layman's. And that still stands to prove there is the chance for a fight over the front row by the end of this race. 26 minutes left to go. Wells in. Does Ota follow? Yes, he does. The 55 into the pit lane we go then with the Aston Martin of Asahi Ota, looking for a potential overcut over Vladislav Mizin to get up onto the podium. At the very best, he's looking for an overcut over Przemak Zulim. Be the better of the two Aston Martins. Gonzalez currently on his run down through the run of the Curb de Garlaban in towards Virage de la Tour. No news yet on a potential move to the pits. Meanwhile, the gap between Scallops and Valorio drops another tenth of a second to 6 seconds now, with a chance for it to go into the high 5 seconds. Into the pits then goes the number 14. Gonzalez is in. Mizin hot on his trails. Wells is released from the pit lane. Mizin is on the same stretch of tarmac, so things are very close between the pair as we go running down towards Verrières. The number 2 in closing range here on the number 12. So you can see just looming in behind on the run towards turn 1 and 2. Wells stays out and Mizin runs all the way off at turn 1 and 2. Is forced to cut Verrier. Tucks back in behind Wells. That has created a very frustrating wad of time between Mizin and Wells. He had him right in the palm of his hands down through Verrier. And things got hairy for him there. Completely underpinned the brakes on his run through Verrier. Was tunneled in on that Ginetta. Asahi Ota emerges from the pit lane by looks of things there just behind Przemak Zulim. And they'll continue their fight for third. The gap at the time right now between these two, 2 seconds, and potentially by looks of it, they're growing on the exit of the just double checking the actual name of it there, Virage de la Sainte-Baume. Meanwhile, we see here the gap between the 41 and the 394 is continuing to close now, having closed a gap of 0.7 of a second to 5.3 seconds. Valorio is catching at a rate of knots here. There is a great chance for him to be side by side with that Nissan by the end of this race, if we are to believe this trend is to continue. 5.4 seconds, so down the Mistral is where the Nissan has the advantage over the Ferrari, but in the corners, that number 41, 488, I should say, is on an absolute warpath here in Le Castellet. Meanwhile, nearest fights to be considered, Mizin v Wells. Last gap was 1.5 seconds, so there is the chance here for the Mercedes to fight back. But as we saw over the first half of this race, just how active things have been for the Ginetta, there is every chance here that Wells can fight that one back. Currently, he holds the power position over Mizin. Also to be considered the fight between the two Astons of Ota and Zulim. 1.8 seconds as we cross into the next lap here for Wells v Mizin at the forefront of GT4. 23 minutes left to go before the checkered flag on what has been a very active round of the championship here in the first endurance of 2 this season. What a way to get us to the end of the first half of season 3, and with a race like today's. So looking to catch on board with a few drivers here. We can actively monitor the gap going on just behind the fight at the forefront of GT4 with what is going on at the forefront of GT3 here. Mr. Scallops on board with, at the moment, with the Nissan, as we can see, closing into range. Now less than 5 seconds away is Anthony Valorio. Watching here with the Nissan as we cross onto the Mistral Straight on the exit of the Virage de la Sainte-Baume. In the slipstream now of Mizin, cutting up past the number 2. Next is that number 12 up in front of him there. Depending on when he catches, this could actually choose to harm, really, the number 12 and potentially force him back into the number 2. You see, though, has caught both of them before the run into turn 8, so that shouldn't really create any issues for Tom Wells. As I say that, though, he runs out wide, very wide on the exit of turn 8. Was that perhaps from all the spray generated from these cars? We'll try and get a look with someone close enough to another car down at the Mistral, just to give you an example of how much spray these drivers are dealing with as the weather continues to pound down on this track. Meanwhile, we see here, Mizin v Wells is now within a second of one another. Have a look on board with Vladislav Mizin on with this newly found fight once again for first place in the GT4 division. We try to get a look on board with the driver's eye view of things, or moreover just from the dash cam, just so you can see the amount of spray kicked up here. Now this is undoubtedly what that number 12 had to go through when the 394 emerged up over his nose on the run down towards turn 8 at the Curve de Sun. You can see it just creates this heavy mist over the nose of these drivers. Very difficult to gauge your position on track. Even worse when you're right up the back end of another driver. And that's going to be the case here for the number 41. Right behind the number 2 on the run in towards Virage de la Hotel. The Nissan just up in front of him there. The gap now having increased quite a ways as he's caught up behind the 2 leading GT4s. Now up past 6 seconds. Now we see the difference between GT4 and GT3. We'll see there the number 2 picks up into the slipstream. But by how much longer can he hope to hold on to that when you can see the 488 just disappears upfield? Now ahead of both the leading GT4s. It's been enough, though, to give Vladislav Mizin a little bit of a slingshot here up towards the back end of the Ginetta. This is where we could once again see the fight for the lead in GT4. Looking up the inside, super late there between the 12 and the 2. And by looks of it, that does give Vladislav Mizin the run he needs on the exit of the Curb de Sang. Running out wide was Tom Wells. What is the fight back chance here from the Brit in the number 12? Looking back up the inside at Le Bousset. We've seen things go sour before with switchback moves like these. The number 12 and the number 2 stay side by side. Could it be another switchback on the run in towards the Virage de Bendor at turn 10? Not this time around. All hope is not yet lost for Ginetta, though, in this race. 20 minutes left to go. Vladislav Mizin looks to take the lead here of GT4. Now we must consider as well, no, this is very much for the lead of GT4. We had to update the data there, but up the inside goes Wells. It's a last ditched effort there to try and stave off an advance by Mizin. Mizin now takes the helm of first place, but with Wells very close on his tail, will cut away from the leading number 2 to catch on with the number 12, fighting tooth and nail to retake the lead on board with Wells. Down through Verrières, you can see the Mercedes just holding center mass of the road. Good area denial. He's the bigger of the 2 cars. He knows he can leverage that size against the Ginetta. Now, this could be a real area of struggle for the Ginetta. Now, it'll be in the slipstream, so it'll be able to stay with, but the question remains, especially when we get up past towards 6th gear here, is how much closer can Wells hope to stay before turn 8? Climbing up through the gears here, very quick onto it. As you see, we're up in 6th gear, and really, there's sort of a hard limit coming up right about here. About 242 kilometers an hour. Where it just stops really making any kind of effort to accelerate. It's hit its peak. It doesn't want to do much more than that. And that's the frustration met by Ginetta drivers on a global scale here on ACC, no matter where in the world they've come from and in what series they're in. That is a universal issue with the G55. It's that sort of hard limit, that hard ceiling for top speed. On a track like this, it is quite impressive nonetheless that even in spite of what has been effectively pre-programmed issues to keep the engine in good nick, that he has been able to put on such a good fight for the lead of this race. And I'd say we're not far from seeing it once again side by side. It was a bit of an odd run in that final sector for Mizin on the run down towards turn 13. Wells could be looking up the inside. Mizin knows this already and is covering it off. Wells looking to go around the outside, perhaps to a very late apex, holds the momentum for it. Back onto the acceleration. He's got acceleration over the Mercedes, but the question remains, can he hold it up the inside on the run up towards turn 1 and 2? We're seeing them side by side on the run down towards Verrières at turn 1 and 2 here. 16.5 minutes left to go. We're back into the fight for first place. Up the inside goes Tom Wells to potentially retake the lead. It's side by side, a little bit of contact between the 2 and the 12. Nearly on the exit of turn 2 was there more contact, but moreover, Wells retakes the lead. Down towards Virage de la Hotel. I do not believe what I am seeing here. Such a valiant defense by Ginetta. All hope is not yet lost. I said that before, and never truer has a word been spoken. 16 minutes to the line here, and he's back into the lead. This has been one of the greatest fights we've seen in GT4 racing in a long, long time. We've seen some good fights over the last couple of weeks through a few different series. We saw most recently a brand new race win over on the Competizione Performance League GT4 Pro-Am Cup America Series over on the American circuit. We took our visit over to Eastern Europe as it stood, went to the Hungaroring, saw a new race win from Giovanni Badiali in a great fight there. We're seeing another great fight in GT4, easily the best GT4 fight this season between Wells and Mizin at the forefront of action here in Le Castellet. Down at turn 8, now that Wells has got command of the situation, he's not making silly mistakes down at the Curb de Sang. He's not trying to go gung-ho for it. He's not giving it the old Sterling Moss. He's in firm control now. He's in the pilot seat. He's in command of the situation, and it's this kind of difference in performance which is now creating issues behind him for Vladislav Mizin. The number 2 floundering there through Le Busset, but caught in the spray generated by that Ginetta. Not a lot of visibility to be found. You can see he's poking in there to the far edges of the track, trying to find even an ounce of room to see over the shoulder of the number 12 on the run in towards turn 12. Virage de la Tour then gives rise to the Virage Dupont, the Mercedes, not looking up the inside, knowing it doesn't possess the stopping power over the Ginetta. And it's that the number 12 is able to hold over the number 2, dangling that over his head like a carrot on a stick, knowing the Mercedes can't outbrake him and can only, at the very least, try to outcorner him. Really, the only case for the Mercedes right now that we know for certain is that it can outrun him. Out through turn 1 and 2, Wells back into the lead then. We'll catch on with these two in a moment's time. We take a look around the field to see things are potentially still getting closer. No is actually the case here, as we once again catch on board with the 41. Now, that gap was coming down to beneath 5 seconds at one point to Valorio and Scallops, but after running into traffic, courtesy of the GT4s, that gap has now opened back up to 7.5 seconds between Nissan and Ferrari. It's been a great hustle so far, though, by Valorio. He's played this strategy very close to the chest here. Had it not been for the presence of the GT4s on this grid, he'd had every chance to hunt down at that Nissan. But it seems now, as we cross in to the last 14, now 13.5 minutes of racing here in Le Castellet, that his chances may have just fizzled out, as it's now up 8.3 seconds between himself and the leading Nissan. We see here Asahi Ota versus Matthew Copsey, as he now slots in between the two Aston Martins of Ota and Zulim. This is going on at the moment for the last of the podium positions. Meanwhile, up front, it's still warfare between the 12 and the 2. Speaking of, just quickly catching on board with those two again. 0.3 of a second on the run down towards Le Busset. Up in front of them there, that's Dion Helgelian. Not too far behind them then will be Stephen Sutton to poke his head into the mix here. The number 7, not far from their current position. You can see just lingering in the spray in the background would be that number 7. Looking back on board here with Zulim, Copsey and Ota. Sahi Ota currently defending 3rd place, but Matthew Copsey looking up the inside. He may have an early opportunity here to move up to 3rd place. What looked to have been a slightly longer drawn-out battle between the two. The Aston Martin earlier on the brakes, Porsche later onto the brakes, and there taking up the helm of 3rd place, Matthew Copsey over Asahi Ota. But we see stepping out there, that's Copsey, runs all the way around. Let's see if we can catch with the Porsche as he's gone all the way around, head over heels. Fortunately, he's kept from the barriers. So now I don't see many drivers complaining about the design of this track, but now we see Copsey has fallen down past the two Aston Martins and now down towards Division 5th. Now, not the end of the world. It's been a good redeeming drive considering the conditions he's played against, but when he started from pole position, this might be a race to forget. Looking back on board with the leading pair of GT4. Not much to comment on then in GT3, as most of the battles have now dissipated. Our main focal point is going to stand between the 1st and 2nd rows of GT4 in today's race. Wells v Mizin at the forefront, Ota v Zulim at the 2nd row. You see lingering in the spray, 1.1 seconds away from him at this time, Vladislav Mizin with Mercedes. You can see as we get up towards 6th gear, he's hitting that hard limit right about now, and that's where the Mercedes has got about a couple seconds here. Actually, definitely a lot more than a couple seconds. We're looking in the ballpark of, that's what, about 10, 15, 20, no, 15 seconds, where he's got an opportunity to reel in that Ginetta. Down through turn 8, bit of a wider run than the number 2. That's the momentum that Mizin needs all this time until let me say it's contact between the pair. They collide down at turn 9. Wells hit from behind there by Vladislav Mizin. He lets him stay back out in front. Not looking to get himself into any further trouble there. We saw that one play out in our minds in slow motion. We knew from the start there, a little bit of a wiry exit of turn 8. He got onto the brakes very late into turn 9. He was even going to run all the way off the track. He was going to run directly up into the rear bumper of that number 12. And as it turns out, that was the latter. Out through turn 13, we'll wonder to see if that's created any damages in the last 10 minutes of racing here for Wells. This could go all the way down to the wire by the way it stands at this time between Mizin and Wells for the lead of GT4 here in the midway mark of Season 3. Meanwhile, just quickly checking in on that front row, it's still 7.1 seconds between Valorio and Scallops. That is not to take away, pardon me, from what Valorio has been able to do today under strategy and with very, very solid performance throughout. Putting Ferrari up to second place, he'll be advancing his way up through GT3's championship, getting closer and closer to that top three. As we see here, one of the other fights on field at the moment, Julian Viota, two Astons head-to-head. It's been a confusing time for Aston Martin, of course, a manufacturer that we've said on several occasions is one of the best to have in wet weather conditions. Evidently might not be the case for GT4, as both of them have been shown up by the likes of Mercedes and Ginetta. Going to catch back on board with Ginetta at this time. Still 1.1 seconds the gap between Mizin and Wells as we drop into the last 9 minutes of racing. With the 394 not far from the line here, we're looking on the back of about 5 more laps of racing before we see the checkered flag. And these next 5 laps for these two are going to tick by like centuries, given how close they've been to each other all race long. On board with Wells, still fighting for division first. It's a pity then that the TRTN Driver of the Day accolade, an award introduced over the course of GT4 Challenge here on HCCL, is no longer a factor, because you'd be pretty right in your minds in assuming where our votes would be going. It'd be to these two right here. The number 2 and the number 12 have absolutely floored all expectations of what racing could have been like today here for GT4. As this has been some of the closest, some of the most brutal fighting we've seen on record. So looking around the field as we drop into the last 8 minutes of racing on what has been a fantastic 82 minutes now of racing here in Le Castellet. Mr. Scallops leads the charge 6.3 seconds up the road from Anthony Valorio. Just to note that as well, that is an improvement over where the gap used to be between the pair. We'll see what the update is looking like for that a little later on. Dion Helgeli in third with Stephen Sutton in fourth. Luca Tamburini makes the top 5 for GT3. Then right behind them on the grid, we see here ongoing from 6th and 7th on the field, but division first and second, the fight of the lead for GT4 between Tom Wells and Vladislav Mizin. Asahi Ota on for the podium in GT4 with Zdemak Zulim right behind him, charging for his own chances to once again return to the podium. Matthew Copsey at the back of the top 5 for GT4 after a real roller coaster of a race so far. As we drop into the last 10 minutes, Matthew Copsey then ahead of Matthias de Munster, who's made a very solid turnaround of things there, up to Division 6th ahead of Dennis Gonzalez, Division 7th, Marco Gagliolo, Division 8th, and we see Stephen Black there, 14th in the race, but Division 6th after 2 DNFs on today's field. Julian 9. And hang on just a moment, we're about to see here, looks to be side-by-side action, having caught him up all the way down towards turn 8. Vladislav Mizin made 4 tenths over Tom Wells. We see, though, charging out through turn 8. Mizin slightly out wide. Wells onto the perfect racing line on the run in towards Le Busset at turn 9 here. He could be sizing up his chances back to the inside. It has happened like clockwork every single time. Both of them, foot to the floor, pedal to the metal. This is proper old school stuff as well. You're seeing here these two drivers. You see the attitude of the cars as well. They are just flooring it now. This is properly old school style racing. And up the inside, in towards the Virage de la Tour. It's contact between Wells and Mizin. Mizin back out in front there. Wells tucks in right onto his behind on the run down the opening straight in towards Verrières. In towards turn 1, clips the inside, then through to turn 2, clips the inside again, gets a little bit more curve than the Mercedes up in front of him. But getting the better exit was Mizin. Not for nothing, if he doesn't come away with the race win today, he can rest assured as one of the best performances we've ever seen in this series. But he looks at the inside. He wants P1 and it's contact again. This time between the 2 and the 12. Down at, by looks of it there, Virage du Camp. Now on the exit of the Virage de la Saint-Baume. How can things fare between these two now as they make their way onto the Mistral Straight with a significant gap now in favour of the number 2? Has this been the straw to break the camel's back in what has been a legendary fight between Tom Wells and Vladislav Mizin? Only time will tell. On to the last 3 laps of racing then from the 394, having just crossed the line a moment ago. Mr. Scallops, I should point out, is being closely intercepted by Anthony Valorio. 6.1 seconds and closing. Watching though between our fingers as the gap opens up, now double where it was before we entered the Mistral Straight to 1.6 seconds. Mizin starting to put distance over Tom Wells. Has this been the end of the road on what has been one of the greatest battles of this race? Might not be the case, as you saw very wide there through Le Busset was Mizin. He drops about 0.3 of a second. Then into the Virage de Bendor, very wide entry, and I think that's mostly a case now where the track is getting a little too wet in that area for either of the GT4s to find anything to work with. Tamburini into the pit lane. A curious one there for the 813. That Porsche is in. That's going to shove these two up an extra position on the field. Mizin can actually see the top 5 overall by the end of this race. It could be either him or Tom Wells for that matter. Meanwhile, the 55 and the 91 are getting closer and closer to a chance of a fight themselves. We still watch here with the number 2 and the number 12. Fated rivals of this grid. On the run in towards turn 1 and 2. Later onto the brakes, they're really trying to throw absolutely everything into these last couple of laps here. Tom Wells. If he doesn't walk away with the race win today, he can absolutely walk away with one of the best performances we've seen on record, as mentioned before, and still with a very solid points haul. You see, though, he has been enthusiastic every step of the way to get back into the fight, get stuck in on the fight of the race lead in GT4, and I really don't see this going away anytime soon. I think it's going to be all the way to the checkered flag before we see a conclusive answer as to who wins in GT4. It doesn't look like a runaway victory for either side of it. These two will go down to the wire in the next 2 laps. Not often is it the case in GT3 or GT4 for that matter, where we see race wins decided by so close. But it's a breath of fresh air here at the season midway. These 90-minute races evidently create the perfect melting pot for such a scene. Down towards turn 8, now up a second. You see, it's because of that hard limit on the speed for the Ginetta. What that ultimately means, though, pound for pound, he can carry a slight tad more momentum. As he's coming into that corner ever so slightly slower, he can hold a higher average speed. Down through turn 10. This is where the Ginetta does make up the bulk of its time on the Mercedes. So really, he'll be scoping this area up in the next 2 laps to come. So you see there, flickering on the brakes. Mizin trying absolutely everything now to rotate the car, but it seems that it's a bit of a losing game on both sides here. Both the Ginetta and the Mercedes, having beaten each other to a bloodied pulp over the course of this race, can barely give anything more in the corners than they have already. On to the 40th lap of racing for these two, but they've still got 2 more to follow. 394 currently out through Le Busset. And on this trajectory, we'll be on to 1 more lap, giving the rest of the field 1 more lap before the end of this race. Seeing here with Wells v Mizin. Now, I don't want to take away from what's going on behind as well with the fight between the 2 Aston Martins, but things could be coming to a head here in a moment's time between these two. Just to quickly pick up on this. Actually, hold on just a moment. Up the inside once again. Doesn't result in anywhere near as much upset, but still running off wide before the Virage de la Saint-Baume. Was Vladislav Mizin back on board with Tom Wells. So we'll pick back up on that conversation in a moment's time. As now on the exit of Saint-Baume onto the Mistral Straight. You can see trying to cut any kind of slipstream now off of Tom Wells. This is Vladislav Mizin firing on all 8 cylinders as we get on towards the final lap in a moment's time. Meanwhile, I think we just saw a disconnect from one of the drivers on today's grid. Not 100% sure as to who that was. We did see a name flicker in there and then flicker away. Bear in mind, these two still with one more lap to play for. This is going to be one we'll be watching adamantly all the way to the line here. They're on for one more lap coming. Down through Le Bousset. Not far from now are we on for the chances here of a hat-trick of victories for the 394. We'll see them to the checkered flag. We've still been watching on board with these two as they carry on the saga here of fantastic racing in this series. Where GT3 may have been spread out, GT4 has been airtight by comparison. On the run down through Virage de la Tour, on the way towards Virage du Pont at turn 13, onto the final lap we go between these two, and it is all hell blazing now on the front row. Mercedes versus Ginetta. The Goliath and the David, as it were, of the front row of this grid. And it all comes down to this. On to the final lap we go then between these two. Down towards Verrières, turn 1 and 2. We'll be catching on with the race leader, soon to be race winner in a moment's time up in GT3. But things have still yet to be decided in GT4. We see breaking away by a second there is Mizin. We'll catch on with these two in a moment's time here. On board with Mr. Scallops down towards turn 13. It has been a showstopper today by Nissan once again. Falls in like clockwork here. A hat-trick of victories for the 394 across the line then. Mr. Scallops wins in Le Castellet. A great fight throughout there. 3.7 seconds off his trails. Anthony Valorio takes second place. Dion Helgelian looking at his chances of third. He's currently on his way down through Garlaban. But let's get back on board with the fight of these two here in GT4. Could it be Mizin or could it be Wells? As they head down the Mistral for the last time today, they have but only a few more corners to decide the fate of GT4. Looking to catch on board here. Valorio celebrating alongside Mr. Scallops, but let's go on board to the leading of two here. Vladislav Mizin on his way through turn 8. With the Ginetta close on his trails here. Both of them absolutely hell for leather through turn 8. Now to turn 9. Mizin leading away from Wells by 1.2 seconds. Through Le Bousset. As we cut away here off of the race-winning graphic for Mr. Scallops, we're not far from announcing our second race winner today, and it's still up in the air as to who precisely can that be. On the run out through Garlaban then, in towards the Virage de la Tour, and then the Virage du Pont. It's either Ginetta or Mercedes. Having a look at it here. On with the Mercedes at this moment through turn 12, then to turn 13. Is it going to be, by looks of it, it very well could be on the run around turn 13. Despite a great fight all the way to the line, it'll be Vladislav Mizin to take the win in GT4. Very close on his trails then, Tom Wells by half a second. These two were inseparable there. Though he may not have come away with the race win today, Tom Wells ought to be incredibly proud of himself for such a performance as that, as it was so fine in the balance there for Ginetta to take their first. There is nothing to say that it cannot happen again. Third then in division, Asahi Ota for Aston Martin. Przemek Zulim behind him for division 4th. We'll get the full results up in a moment's time. Your two race winners then in GT3 as the results drop onto the screen there. Mr. Scallops wins in GT3 and Vladislav Mizin wins in GT4. For the entire grid then, for GT3, the results are as following. Mr. Scallops first, Anthony Valorio second, Dion Helgelian third, Stephen Sutton fourth, Luca Tamburini in fifth, and Stephen Black in sixth. That's on division rankings, not overall. Then for GT4, Vladislav Mizin first, Tom Wells second, Asahi Ota third, Przemek Zulim in fourth, Matthew Copsey in fifth, Matthias de Munster sixth, Dennis Gonzalez seventh, and Marco Gagliolo in eighth. Two DNFs then, Julian Nine and Julian Hayes for today's race. But what a round that has come to be then, folks. Absolute jaw-dropper here at the season midway. Taking a look as to where we'll be in the next round to follow. February 7th brings us to the land down under for round 5 of the championship at the Mount Panorama Circuit in Bathurst, New South Wales, Australia. That is set to be an absolute riot if today has been any precursor to the action to follow. Then after that, round 6 brings us to Snetterton on February 14th, Valentine's Day, on a double stint where we have both this and the NLRL Console Endurance Series as next round, I believe at Monza. And that's going to be a great double act there at round 6 of that championship, and I believe also round 5 of the other. The penultimate round then coming up the week thereafter. Actually, 2 weeks thereafter. We get a bit of a break after round 6, after February 14th, as February 28th. We'll be going to the Nürburgring for another 90-minute race at the penultimate round of the season. Then it all comes to a close on March 7th at the Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps. What an opening half to the season that's been, and what a round that has been as well. Absolute jaw-dropper of an event there. Now, for what's coming up next tomorrow, just to bring up my calendar here, just to make sure that I'm getting the name of it correct. We have a one-off unique event that's going to be the precursor to a larger project we've got running alongside the folks at the Competizione Performance League, the GT3 Real World Racing Day. And that will be set to go live tomorrow. And we'll be going live for about 4:50 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. That's about the last 10 minutes of free practice. We will then get on to a very interesting race indeed to follow. That's coming up tomorrow at the Watkins Glen International Circuit, a full 60-minute qualifying session, and then a 120-minute race, 2 pit stops, which are both mandatory, but an open strategy as to what. So very curious. More to follow then on that when discussing the event at hand. That will be coming up tomorrow about 4:50 p.m. GMT at the end of free practice for that, live from Schuyler County, New York State, at the Watkins Glen International Circuit. That's all from us here on TRTN. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care. Good night.